Time Show. And now your hosts, Artie and Sriram.
Welcome to the Good Time Show. Let's get into it.
Welcome.
I know we took a break
We
last week.
we did. Hope everyone here had a fantastic 4th of July weekend. If you're in the US, or just a great weekend anywhere you are. And what did we do last weekend?
We were one of those really annoying people who posted photos from our vacation. I think there was this whole meme about stop
Mhm.
posting European photos, and we actually ended up doing exactly that.
Yeah, we had the whole experience: delayed flights,
Lost baggage.
lost bags.
We still haven't gotten one of the bags,
That,
so
that
it's
is right.
just gone into ether.
That is right. There's an airline holding on to a bag of ours, but no, it was great fun. And actually, I think for me, and I think for you, it's kind of good to catch up on just reading.
Yeah, yeah,
I hadn't had time to just read stuff in a while,
yeah.
so I got to read, well, both like fiction and nonfiction. On the fiction side, read some great like Stephen King. Read some.
You're one of those like speed readers. Like Shrim's one of those people who would just like be on a 2 hour flight and he would like start a book. When we land, he'd be like, yeah, I finished that book and I started this other book. And then, I like read like 50% of it. And 50% is like 400 pages. And I swear, every single time I'm like, well, I don't think you actually read the whole book.
Which that isn't true to it. I think when I see Aarti reading a book and she would call me out and she'd be like, "Well, that is an amazing scene." I'm like, "Yes, that's right, that amazing scene. Yes, that was
I
awesome."
just feel like our traversal paths are so different. Mine's like very depth first, and yours like breadth first. I
Ye-
think you skim through the book and then you kind of like
Yeah, I
find
think
stuff
I
to
had
read.
this lesson. I think it's harder on fiction, but in nonfiction, I think one of the sort of the unlocks for me was something that I learned from Mark and I think from Naval, which is like, going through childhood, right? Like, you had this guilt if you didn't finish a book, and you were like, I need to take this book, finish it, then go move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And this started feel it felt like a luxury and felt so wrong, but
Yeah.
you don't need to do that. You can just open a book and just, if you don't like
Why
it,
not though? Why not?
because you have limited time to read, and sometimes books are not good. And honestly, there are a lot of
Well,
nonfiction
I think that's true for abandoning books, but when you like a book, you have
that
to
that
read it end to end.
that is fair. But actually, we're gonna talk about the book tonight. I think sometimes you can just kind of
Yeah.
seek through a book,
Yes.
and just flip through and find the interesting chapters.
Yeah.
And but no, I had a lot of fun reading, and also wrote a lot of code, which I haven't done in quite a while.
Yeah.
I always wanted to.
I remember you sitting in a coffee shop in Copenhagen, just writing
Rust
Ethereum
code.
code, Rust code. Yeah, that kind of cool. I don't know if that coffee shop has seen a lot of people coming in and writing Rust code.
It was just fun. And I think, by the way, Rust is super fun, but I'd never gotten beyond Hello World before. But this time, for the first time, I actually wrote some fun stuff and learned a lot. And but by the way, nobody should trust me when it comes to writing code. I should never be allowed to check in anything interesting. But it was kind of fun, and I'm now a Rustafarian or Rustian or whatever. Yeah, there's a fun term about that, but that was great. But anyway, so we have someone interesting,
Really
controversial,
special. Really special.
polarizing, brilliant.
I mean, we've known Balaji for how long now?
10 years, I
10
think. I
years.
actually looked it up. We've known him for 10 years. One of my earliest emails to him is almost exactly 10
Why'd
years.
you email him?
I'm going to get into it with him, but I think at the time he had this company,
Yeah.
21E6,
Yeah.
21 power
Yeah,
6,
yeah.
10 power 6, 21 million for Bitcoin.
Yep.
And I think at the time I was at Facebook, and I had reached out to him because I think I'd seen his talk or something he's writing. But I remember very clearly, we should talk about the story when he gets here,
Yeah.
meeting him and that whole encounter. But it's been 10 years now, and I think all of us have been through so many life
A
stages.
lot. Yeah, yeah. No, we're going to talk a lot about that stuff, like his early talks. You're going back to Stanford, like his MOOC from Stanford. It's legendary.
The MOOC, yes. Oh my
Yeah, yeah,
goodness,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. I mean, it's just he's just one of those. Like, I think for me, what's been really interesting, just following Balaji's trajectory is like he's just this amazing multidisciplinary thinker.
Mhm.
Like, here's a guy who can like talk about crypto, talk about genomics, talk about like geopolitics, which you're going to talk about a lot now. Yeah, was a CTO of Coinbase at some
Mhm.
point in time, and it's just like a lot, just done so much in such a short time. So I'm really excited. I don't know if you saw my IG story, but I just sent like 4 straight stories being like, I am so excited about this episode. It's just going to be really fun.
One, we've known Balaji for a while, and kind of lucky to be friends with him. But one thing was when I went back in history, and you go watch his kind of his breakout talk, which he did
Yeah.
at YC Startup School in 2013.
2013. Yeah.
There's almost this through line that you can draw, and but that through line exists with all of his public work. I
And
would
now
say
with his book.
with this book,
Yep.
which we're obviously going to get into, but also I think every single technology conversation I've had with him,
Yeah.
political conversation I had with him, every single encounter. So
He's very consistent.
yes, and I have to say I'm a little jealous
Yeah.
about this part of him, which is I should tell him when he comes on, which is it's not often that you see somebody who kind of has this unity of purpose
Yeah.
through almost like a decade. I think actually honestly a much longer
Much
period
longer
of
time
his
frame.
life, which
Yeah.
is he's been working on the same theme idea, pushing it forward. And I don't think I have anything like that. I think most people have anything like that. And I'm kind of jealous. Like he has this kind of this real purpose to
Yeah.
what he's been doing, and he's been doing it a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very core to what you would find in like this research mathematical kind of mentality almost, where
Mhm.
it's like, you have to like be consistent, have this one particular worldview of problems where you just like the arc of time just goes through like you trying to like eventually solve
Mhm.
this one consistent set of problem spaces, and just like figuring that out. So yeah, I really enjoy like all that he's like the network state was really good. We're going to talk about
Mhm.
that. And there's just a lot to go unpack today.
Yeah, the other I think.
Do you think it's going to be a 60-minute episode?
Oh my goodness. Probably, unless somebody has a technical malfunction
I
and
think
we lost.
Tim Ferriss in the podcast said something like, "We want to keep it to like an hour and a half to 2." Famous last words, and then I think it was like what 3.5 hours, something like
Yep,
that.
yep, yep.
Yeah. So
And there's just so much to cover. And I think one thing I actually want to do is I feel like a lot of people know Balaji for his presence on Twitter and his
yeah,
writing.
yeah,
But there's so much about his persona. He's so funny. He's very loyal. He's just a kind of a great human being. And I don't think that maybe I think the folks who just known him in recent times maybe don't know that, and it's super fun to kind of like try and get across. So, uh,
man, I really wish he was here to like listen to you say all that.
yeah, well, let me. Okay, we're gonna do this live. We're gonna text him and see whether he can come on. Come on over, Balaji.
It's 10. We said 10. He'll be here,
Yeah.
and he's got experience with this kind of thing.
Oh yes.
So
I've been loving his media podcast star. Here we go. What is your earliest memory of Balaji?
let's see. I mean, I think a lot of it was just like talks. I think 2013.
Oh, wait, there he is.
Oh, there he is. Yeah.
Hello.
Hey, Balaji. We've just been talking about you before you showed up.
Yeah.
Hopefully only good
Shriram,
things.
for once, surprisingly said some like nice things about the guest, and I was like, dang it, like
Yeah.
Balaji is not here to listen to this.
Let me tell you, Balaji. First
Go
of all,
ahead.
welcome. Thank you for doing this. But I was telling all of our audience here that a lot of people, a celebrity. We've been for a while, and a lot of you know
We
you
knew
for.
you when.
We knew you went right, but
Yeah.
you're going to get into it, right? How long we have known you and so on. But a lot of you know you for your writing and your tweets and your ideas. But I was telling folks here, there's a lot of other part of you. You're funny, you're incredibly loyal, and as a friend, you're kind of a warm human being, and there's kind of this whole other part of you. But thank you for doing this. How are you doing? How are you doing?
Well, it's very kind of you. Thank you, Sriram. And I've known I think you and Arthi both before you blew up, and
Blew up?
being like fun to
Hopefully,
kind of
I don't
watch.
think it's like being physically like put on
Yeah.
weight. Is that a
You can tell us. You can tell us. It's fine.
Yeah, no. I mean, blew up in obviously the good way. Not, I actually think you look exactly the same actually as
Oh my
as a
goodness.
few years ago. Yeah.
It's the Indian genes,
Uh,
Balaji. It's the Indian genes.
Well, I perhaps so. That's right. But yeah, no, I'm doing good. And I think Oh man, a lot. I mean, this was actually a lot of work, but I actually only feel I'm kind of at the halftime, halftime mark.
Yeah,
Midway line or
basically
something like
Katy
that.
Perry at the Super Bowl.
Yeah, no. So I'm basically, what I've shipped with, so the book is at thenetworkstate.com. It's free online, et cetera, et cetera. But what I've shipped is basically, I very much think of it as a V1,
Yeah.
because I've so much stuff that I want to add, and all these supplements and code snippets and figures and millions of things that I just didn't have the time to put in the kind of ship or die, deadline, self deadline I'd set for myself. But anyway, we'll get more will come, basically. Go ahead.
Well, wow. Okay, there you go. And we're going to get right into so much of the book. But, I
Sure.
was preparing for this. And, I actually went and looked up. Balaji, do you have a guess? Do you have a sense of how long we've actually known each other?
On the order of 10 years, I think, but known each other
Exactly.
more
Yeah,
recently.
yeah.
Pretty exactly. I was looking through my emails and, I think we met. I don't know if you remember this. We met around 2013. And I remember this very well because you had just, by the way, blown up because of your YC talk. And I, like I always do, had cold email Balaji. I was like,
The Startup School 2013.
the Startup School 2013 talk,
Yeah.
and which I think is time when a lot of people kind of just were like, well, who's this guy? And you get this idea, and you kind of had this. I mean, you always had a fantastic career even before then.
Sure. But that was my first public speaking, actually. I think
There was this big moment, and I remember I think I had cold emailed you, and I was at Facebook at the time.
Yeah.
And I think at the time you were maybe doing 21E6 or maybe thinking about doing 21E6, but I vividly remember meeting you, and you were probably the first person to really help me understand Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Which and sadly I should probably gone home and bought a bunch of.
What good did that do?
Yeah, but I remember distinctly meeting you, and true story. I came back home and I told Aarti, I was like, I met this guy, right? And he's the most brilliant, crazy, funny person I ever met. Like I remember, like I think in one of your offices in San Francisco, we met and we walked around, and I was so struck. And one of the interesting things, we should play the video of your YC startup school thing. One of the things that really blew me away is if you go watch that talk now and all the way to the book now, it's like there's kind of this unity of purpose and mission. Oh, here we go. Here's the talk. Here we go. Let's. I want to watch this for a few. Let's just take a few seconds.
Sure.
Talk about why comedy. I guess you guys all know about that. Let me introduce myself briefly while things are loading here. So my name is Balaji Srinivasan. There's actually 12 people with my same first and last name in the Bay Area alone. In fact, I randomly ran into another one of them at Stanford and founded a genomics company with him. I go by my full initials BSS, and I am a Stanford lifer. I got my BS/MS PhD at Stanford, and in 2006, I started teaching computer science and statistics there. I left Stanford in early 2008.
Okay, let's pause. So
to found a genomics.
So I want to ask you, what was the story behind this? What led to this? And walk me through this whole moment and what do you remember from this?
What I remember from this, well, it's funny because first of all, nowadays I would never introduce myself as a Stanford lifer or anything like that anymore. And the reason is I think like academia was starting to be in decline then, but now is like in steep decline. And I don't actually even think of that as a useful credential or something anymore. I've got this concept of crypto credentials. Instead, you can evaluate people around the world by whatever objective metrics they've developed, right? But I'll come back to that later if you want. But what's going through my head? So this was in October 2013. It was YC Startup School. And actually, a bunch of other folks who you'll recognize were there. Chris Dixon, our colleague gave a talk. And
I actually saw that video when I was watching this. It's it's pretty fun to kind of go back in time.
Yeah, it's kind of go back to that. And Jack Dorsey gave a talk then, and it was something like drink red wine and stand up straight, or some sort of inscrutable cone-like kind of thing, which is funny or whatever. It's like and various folks gave talks like that. I thought were all perfectly good, and kind of like within what I call the mainstream of tech. At that time, still kind of the mainstream of tech, but basically what YC and SV Angel and Founders Fund and A16Z by that time had established as like the through lane, which is seed A, B, C, like the entire sort of YC machine, which credit to Paul Graham built from basically scratch in 2005. And it was something that, funding very young people, funding web only, all of this stuff was very non-consensus 17 years ago, or so, right? So this machine was kind of in full bore at that time. And I understood it, but I was not really of it, in the sense that, with genomics and with doing like a non-YC thing and Bitcoin and stuff like that Coinbase was a YC startup at that batch, but YC is still not really Web3, and it's not like their core thing. They do a lot of things well, and so on, but it's still not like their core thing. Whereas, let's say A6 and Z, of course, has gone much more into that, right? Partly because I think I was there. Anyway, so running into this, I kind of wanted to, I'd been thinking about these things for a long time, because with genomics, at first I thought that it was a technical problem in terms of, we need to actually be able to get these genotype phenotype maps. And why get these maps? Well, for life extension, for curing diseases. Did you see my tweet about how Super Soldier Serum is real?
Oh yeah.
I did,
I know there's like a Marvel, Chris Evans Captain America joke in there somewhere.
Yeah. So like, you should put this on screen for your folks if they haven't seen this. Yeah. Okay, like basically, this tweet. I'll post in the comment section,
or you can just stick in the chat and we'll pull it up.
Yeah. So the thing about this is, I'm sure if I can post in the comments or whatever, maybe you can. So this just shows what is being held back in biomedicine. Okay. So this tweet, Super Soldier Serum is real, just to show you what it is. On the left is a wild type mouse, meaning a naturally occurring mouse. On the right is a myostatin null mouse. And just look at the size of that chest, I think in India, they would say 22-inch biceps or something like that. Right. And then you compare that to the before and after of like,
here we go.
Right. Oh, you got it? Okay, great.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah. So that on the left is a wild type mouse. On the right is the myostatin null mouse. Look at the size of that thing and look at the chest. And it's basically just like the, thing from the movies with, Captain America, Steve Rogers before, and then after Super Soldier Serum, he's like super jacked. Right. Yeah. And and this paper, when do you think it came out? You think it came out like last year or the year before?
I'm guessing not.
When did it come out?
By that leading question.
Yeah.
When was don't tell me it's like 1976 or something.
It's basically 2007.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the thing is,
awesome.
Okay, so you think this is cutting edge stuff. There's so much stuff like this, literally, and I've actually potentially got another book in me on just this. Hundreds of pages of insane life extension, transhumanism, brain-machine interface, like human improvement type stuff. And, what's interesting is you talk to people about this, and some people are, they're for universal healthcare. They're really mad about universal healthcare. And then you say, I want life extension. And they suddenly are like, that's impractical. We can't do that. I'm like, is the point to move the mashed potatoes around on the plate and extend somebody's life from like 75 to 78 years at some cost, or is it to increase the envelope for everybody and actually go back to life expectancy, which used to be a big measure of civilizational legitimacy, and start boosting that, right? And not just life expectancy, lifespan, but health span, which is like, could we extend the period during which you're like you're in your 20s, you're muscular, you've got good attention, and you heal and so on. Like, there's almost nobody who gets older who likes that, right? This would be one of the most popular products ever. And David Sinclair and Andrew Huberman and others have kind of written and talked about this, right? Okay.
Yeah, and I'm actually, I'm a big fan of the Andrew, the Fable of the Dragon Tyrant, and all that fun stuff. Wait, I want to get to life experience just a bit, because
I'll connect all the dots. I'll come back to the startup school talk. Yes, okay.
So I want to get back to the talk.
Yes, I'm going to get back to the talk. So this is the background motivation. Was in order to, at first I thought getting to that kind of stuff was a technological problem. So I, did my PhD work in nominally in electrical engineering. I certainly learned about circuits and stuff, but like genetic circuits. So the statistical reconstruction of genetic circuits of microbes and of humans. And I published papers in like dosing algorithms and other types of stuff like pharmacogenetics, all kinds of different genetics. And I learned about that. So I did get the domain knowledge. And I thought it was a technical problem, and there are technical problems to solve. But then over time, I was like, oh, actually, it's a logistical problem. We have to build like a lab to actually do it, because academic labs are not meant for doing thousands, hundreds of thousands of samples. And then eventually, though, I realized it was a regulatory problem, because the FDA cracked down on the entire genomic space and, in general, quantified self and so on in the early 2010s. And crack down on 23andMe, crack down on personal. That's why we don't have billions of personal genomes. They bottleneck the whole thing through the medical system, so that you have to go and get a prescription from your doctor to go and get this. It basically be like, I need to call an electrician to get a computer. It's not like doctors are experts in genomics. It's like it's like this whole thing, right? It's also like you can't. It's like not being able to look in the mirror. You can't get your genome download on a computer. Yeah. So once I realized it was a regulatory thing, I was like, oh, okay. This was a barrier I hadn't thought about as much, because most people don't really hear bad things about the FDA. And then I realized why that was the case. This book came out called Reputation and Power, which actually talks about how the reputation of that agency was the key to its power. Okay. So this book, Reputation and Power, it's written by an FDA sympathizer, right? But you can sort of read it with a different lens on it. Yeah. And I'll come back to the talk in a second. Okay. So it says basically like, the US FDA is the most powerful regulatory agency in the world. How did the FDA become so influential? How exactly does it wield extraordinary power? Reputation and Power traces the history of FDA regulation, and it's like how the FDA cultivated a reputation for competence and vigilance. So as soon as you start hearing stuff like that, you're like, oh, it cultivated this? Oh, it's like an active player? Oh, I thought it was like the DMV. I thought it was just like a checkboxy kind of thing. You don't think about the DMV cultivating itself or doing PR. And then you look in FDA.
You definitely don't hear about DMV sympathizers.
You don't ever do you look and you're like, oh, FDA actually has dozens of like PR offices out there. Oh, and then you get into the guts of it. It's like before they announce an enforcement action, they will go and pre-brief an establishment journalist so they can like pincer attack it, right? So the journalist is like, this fraudulent company is putting dihydrogen monoxide in its products. And
dihydrogen monoxide sounds very scary.
Sounds very scary, right? And if you're not technical, you're like, you can say, well, dihydrogen monoxide at high temperatures can cause scalding and, like asphyxiation. And so it's H2O, it's water, right? And so if I'm not saying every single thing that they say is like that, but a surprising number of things when you go and look at them are like that. And they're these denunciations that sound forbiddingly technical to somebody outside the space. Right. But then when you're in it, it's actually very TSA-like, it's very much something where if you hadn't gone through the TSA, you would actually believe them when they say that they're finding all these guns and drugs and terrorists and what have you. But when you've gone through it, you realize you can't complain about it. Okay. So having gone through this, I realized, wow, actually, it's not just a technical or logistical problem. It's a regulatory problem. And when you get to the regulation, you realize, oh, the regulation is justified by history and it is a jurisdictional problem and a historical problem and a moral problem and ultimately a sovereignty problem.
Yep. Okay. So wait, I want to. Okay, the word sovereignty is loaded, and we're going to go deep on this. Because I think there's a line from the sovereign individual all the way to your book, Rao.
Yes, sure. I disagree with some points in it. Go ahead.
Yeah. We're going to spend a lot of time on your book, but okay. Have you seen any of the recent movies about multiverses or alternate timelines? I don't know. I'm not sure you watch Hollywood, the latest offerings from Hollywood, but
I probably haven't. Which ones are you talking about?
Like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness or Everything Everywhere All at Once. But the central theme of a lot of these movies is there is a person's life, and then there is a point, and then they split. There's alternate timelines, and there's a version A and the version B with like this defining moment. And I have this theory about you, Balaji, that there is a version of you, until the talk, right, which is well-known Stanford, Silicon Valley, central casting, person of Indian descent founder, right? And there's a timeline where you go on, you build companies, you never get into Twitter fights, you're like, the CTO of some company,
Sure. Toiling in useful anonymity. Productive anonymity. Yes.
Wow,
You know,
probably, yeah.
poo-poos the pandemic, doesn't call it.
Yeah, but
all
that
of that.
no fight with journalists. That's one Balaji who's living in a multiverse somewhere out there. But there's the other Balaji, who had
Which is the multiverse of madness.
who had the YC talk happen to him, right? And everyone went like, who the heck is this guy?
Yeah.
Right? Like, wearing, this brown hoodie coming out. And by the way, the slide deck, by the way, for folks, you should go check it out. You have this amazing opening slide which basically compares the United States to Microsoft.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you remember that.
I think
I
that's
remember
just
this, yeah.
Pause for applause.
Yeah,
The crowd just kind of goes bonkers there.
yeah,
for a second.
about like and people like, well, who is this guy, right? And I feel like your life kind of took a separate path from then. There was White Peas and blah blah blah. So I'm curious, right? So what it feels like, what made you embrace this, right? This being transhumanism, the fight against
anti-wokeness.
the sovereign individual, because there's kind of like you had this amazing kind of technology career, and you could have just done that,
Sure.
not been active on Twitter, but then you chose this, right? And I think that sort of, what caused that?
Yeah. So good question. So I'd say, the parallel universe life, I think I have thought about that from a somewhat different standpoint, which is like, what would I be like? Or what, because thinking about history, you think about, the past and so on, like, what would you be like if you're born 100 years ago, 200 years ago? And probably I would have been like an academic mathematician, so that's what I would have been, in a previous life, and
This
just
is
done
like
that.
speaking to me, because that was one of like the things that I wanted to do in life, where it sounds ridiculous and boring and all of that, but to me it was like really exciting.
Yeah.
And Sriram's one of his earliest gifts is like this huge book called Mathematics.
Yeah,
And
but
it's just
by the way, one
great.
thing, Balaji, you and Aarti are very similar in one thing, which is both of you are obsessed with Ramanujan.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Obsessed. I'm not.
1729.
I pay my respects. That's. I think yes. Right.
True.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, similar. I think 1729, the taxi cab numbers,
Sure.
which has got like an incredible story, and it's also like it's a Hardy Ramanujan number. I kind of get annoyed when people call it the Ramanujan number, because people don't give enough credit to Hardy, because he's
No,
the guy
Hardy.
who walked.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hardy's
he
important.
basically I spotted Ramanujan, and that was a point where by that time Ramanujan was like really sick, and he comes to go visit him, and he says, I hope this is not a bad omen. I got off
Right.
this taxi cab, and the license plate number is 1729. And Ramanujan's like, what are you talking about? That's like a really interesting number.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
goes on to go explain it, and that whole sequence, it's now called taxi cab numbers. And not just that, like fastest calculation of pi.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of work that he's done are like foundational to what we are doing with like basically every industry out there.
One of the things I think, so by the way, we are both from Chennai, which is, where Ramanujan originally from.
Sure.
His video, and if folks may not, when I was growing up, we knew Ramanujan because he's a very famous mathematician, but in Chennai, you're like, he's a fellow Chennai person.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think we're famous for like math, chess.
Yeah, lots of nerdy people. But you didn't realize how young he had died. He had died at the age of 31 or 32. He had this, what people don't think is kind of an amoebiasis, and he had this like food-related thing, and he was strictly vegetarian. A lot of things happened, and he died at 31, 32. You don't realize how much he accomplished at like such a young age. So, okay, so do you think, Balaji, do you think the Balaji of 100 years ago would be like filling out notebooks with math formula and not writing books or tweeting?
Well, so the thing about it is, if I felt that society was moving in the right direction, then I'd be fine with just sitting and doing math, and that would be my contribution. It's something I enjoy, and so my contribution to the world, and basically, I feel like someone else had it. Okay, you got it, boom, I can just come and just do my math. And maybe nowadays I do math and I play video games or something like that, which I enjoyed doing as a kid. But the thing is that once I realized that, the nettle must be grasped, that, it's a little bit like you're in some blog or you're on some tweet thread and someone said something incorrect, and you wait, no one else is saying something, and everybody is and it falls to you. Mm-hmm. It falls to you the responsibility of actually posting the correct fact, right? If you don't do it, no one else will, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, well, I don't know if anybody else has put together these various things on regulation and so on and so forth in quite this way, because most of the folks who go through the whole FDA process end up going native or they're silenced. Why? Because, it's a think about the TSA again, right? When you go to the airport, when you go into TSA line, are you making jokes about the TSA?
No. In fact,
No.
I have, and then Aarti has forbidden me from making
Shushes
jokes.
you, right?
She's
Yeah,
like,
she's like,
Because you
shush.
get randomly selected.
Yeah, exactly right. So why would you? So the thing is, you know the thing is a joke, but you do not joke about it. Instead, you roll your eyes and you put your water bottles or whatever. You throw out your water bottles, and the thing is, but you're allowed like the 2-ounce bottles, as if you couldn't mix. This terrorist technology called mixing of 2-ounce bottles into a 4-ounce bottle. Wow, right? And the regulations are absolutely moronic. And yet you have to take off your shoes because some guy did a shoe bomb whatever years ago, and then everybody has to get their skin irradiated. By the way, just on the FDA topic again, like those body scanners are actually something that the FDA fast tracked through for the TSA, because the FDA will green light and pass on through anything that's like a fellow government agency or whatever. But whether they're actually safe or not.
I remember the controversy about this last year. But wait, I want to come back to
anyway,
I think a lot of people.
I'll finish my point. So the thing is that basically, once you realize like that these guys are not just, we know that with Bitcoin and with cryptocurrency that the SEC and CFTC and the entire US financial, that they were holding back hundreds of billions of dollars in wealth creation, maybe in the fullness of time, trillions of dollars, plus like the freedom of the world. Okay.
Right.
And we know that the taxi and hotel regulators were holding back $100 billion at least in terms of ride sharing and room sharing and, all these things. So what is like the FDA holding back? It's like holding back so much more than that. It's holding back your entire life. We literally, like the time before like flush toilets and when people died from dysentery and so on, we will think of this time as like the FDA time as that. Okay. And so the scale of it, people don't understand it unless you've studied this, because it's like Basquiat seen and unseen, do you know what that is?
Yep. Good reference.
Yeah.
Wait. I want to ask you something, right? Because I think most people, or a lot of people, especially in Silicon Valley, have some sense of this, right? We all
now they do. 10 years ago, it was not consensus,
right? But I would say, but they don't speak up about it, right? You might see something wrong on Twitter, but you might just go, you know what? I'm just going to let it slide. I don't want to get into a fight. I don't want to become a public figure. I don't want to, put my career on the line. I don't want to cause my employer any trouble.
You don't want to get canceled.
You don't want to get canceled, which, I don't think this term existed 10 years ago, but, it is the spiritual equivalent of that. But you are different, right? Like at some point, you seem to say, and a lot of people may disagree or agree with the, what you kind of stand for, but you said enough is enough. I'm going to speak up. You're very vocal. You're not afraid to speak your mind and, push your ideas. So was there a moment which made you go enough is enough and put yourself out there?
I don't know if there's any specific one moment, but it's more something where, when I think one way I am wired different is I'm completely okay with going back to zero, right? Like I can go back to a, like featureless hovel with a laptop and give up all worldly possessions and reboot, build myself back up from zero.
It's so funny you say that, because Brian Armstrong said the exact same thing. Like,
oh, really?
This whole, he talked about workplace and politics in the workplace and anti-woke stuff and all of that. And we asked the same question. You're like, did you not worry about repercussions and, just you being canceled and all of that? And he was like, well, if everything went to shit, I still have my laptop and I can still start over, and I built Coinbase from scratch and I can do it again.
That's right.
And it weirdly for us, like we were talking about it later, it felt like inspirational almost,
No, go ahead. Yeah. It is basically the, people, have you heard the term, the will to power from Nietzsche?
No.
So the will to power is a fundamental concept of Nietzsche, maybe the most fundamental concept. And it's often misunderstood. And people think it means power over other people or power over other men, right?
Mhm.
But actually, have you ever seen the movie The Martian?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And so when the Matt Damon character is on like Mars, I think it's Matt Damon, and he says he realizes he's stranded. Okay. And he says, I'm going to have to science the shit out of this.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. That's the will to power. Okay. There were no other humans for him to command on the surface of Mars. He had to just figure it out. Right.
Mhm.
And the power that we're talking about is the power over oneself, right? To become the best version of oneself and like the maximum form of self-improvement. And this is something which extends in many different areas. Like that's also the same theme as transhumanism or optimalism, is to become the best version of yourself. And then when someone is stopping you from doing that and stopping everybody else from doing that, and doing so with all kinds of intricate lies and, rules and stuff, the evil school teacher, the principal, the bureaucrat, right? That is like, like in India, this concept of like the mongoose and the snake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That kind of person, that sort of institutional authoritarian and like a personality like myself, we sort of just like face off over the great divide, you just like lock eyes, and that person knows that like their laws were for me. Okay.
Yep.
That, and conversely, I know that I am there to shift and move and push those things and establish a new equilibrium that is better than the one that they have. Right. So that revolutionary zeal, to drive change is there. It's a real thing, Now, of course, that change should be for the better. And how do you prove it's for the better? Well, this comes back to like the concept of exit from the talk, which is, you have to build something that's not just good in theory, but good enough in practice, which is 1,000 little details that people actually flock to it of their own accord, of their own consent, right? They exit to it, right? So the thing is that, now here's one other very important thing, is many times when you build that new thing, it's not, it's a V3, okay? It's not back to V1. Why? So you let's take Bitcoin example, and then talk about the FT, and then talk about the exit talk. So, you had gold, right? Let's call it V1. And then that was defeated by the US government and more generally the fiat system. And, there's actually advantages to that because it's easy to transmit dollars in time and space, and you can easily represent them on a computer and so on. Whereas gold, it's heavy. And if you actually use it without representing it on a computer, it's like extremely, where you're going to barter a chip of gold to somebody. It's like not very liquid. It's a backup plan. It is still a thing, but it's not something that is very convenient for daily use, right? Then you go to V3 and Bitcoin. Of course, people call it digital gold, but it actually has many aspects of fiat. You can represent it on a computer, you can write programs with it, and so on. And then other cryptocurrencies have different characteristics where you can send them more quickly or micropayments and so on. Okay. So the point is that V3 has aspects of both the V2 and the V1. It's not simply a throwback. It acknowledges that V2 defeated V1 and takes the best aspects of V2, even as it harkens back to the discarded aspects of V1. Okay. And so that's another aspect of what like exit is about. Like, I actually don't believe that you can, end the Fed. I think you can exit the Fed and build a better system. And I don't think you can end the FDA or the other regulatory agencies, but you can build a better version of them. Why do I say that? Because people actually want a regulated marketplace. Meaning, if you look at consumer behavior, they actually want some form of A, star reviews, and B, kicks of bad actors, bans of bad actors, right? For example, eBay, Amazon, in your time at Facebook, you probably looked at Marketplace and so on, even at Twitter, people, so they want some quality ranking, like 1 star to 5 star. And they also want to kick out the 0-star actors who are different. A 2-star actor is somebody who's like well-intentioned, but just makes a low quality product. A 0-star is like a smart hacker who's like evil and is trying to hack it, right? Those are two different failure modes, right? So you want a regulator of a marketplace. And in fact, if you think about it, the biggest tech companies are actually regulators of two-sided marketplaces. It's eBay and it's Airbnb and so on, but it's also actually PayPal with the fraud detection. It's Gmail with the spam filtering and so on. Point is that the entire exit talk that I gave was recognizing that there's certain aspects of the current system which have like succeeded, that are V2s, and figuring out how we build a V3 because of how imperative it was to build a V3, but doing so in a morally consistent way where you're not coercing and forcing people to do it, but actually building that exit.
Mhm.
And how do you build that exit, right? You build that exit through technology. Now, that might seem like a really novel and weird thing to say, but guess what? I have this kind of, like little snippet in the book. Part of the reason that, Columbus, do you know why Columbus got funded to go and check out, other paths to India?
I actually just read his biography, so I got actually this fantastic new biography on Columbus, which came out. So yes, but you should. I think it's a fantastic story. You should give the story.
So the Ottomans had blockaded the normal path to India, and so they needed to use technology to find an exit, an alternative way. Now, it turned out they found the quote new world as a consequence of that in America, and all the colonization that began as a function of it. But technology found an exit, right? And when people talk about the final frontier of space, right? You're using technology to exit and, find this sort of new realm, right? And, when we have Web3 and Bitcoin, like, one of Satoshi's, this is actually one of the today's frontier, one of Satoshi's important points was we can get through decentralization a domain of freedom for a period of time, right?
Right.
And so when you start thinking about it, you're like, oh, actually, and then oceanic navigation, like how did the Puritans and others leave England to come to the New World? Transatlantic navigation was an important technology that afforded them a new kind of exit, right? And exit reopens a frontier. So I've got like 4 examples there, right? Like, you have the blockade of, Ottomans, you have oceanic navigation, which is kind of similar, but different in time. You have, space travel, you have the internet, and, not just crypto and Web3, but the domain name, being able to set up a new domain name. What did the Social Network movie begin with?
The scene with Mark and his girlfriend.
And he registered a domain name on networksolutions.com.
Right.
He got a patch of digital earth to build something, right?
TheFacebook.com.
The Facebook, yeah.
The Facebook.com. That's right. Now,
Facebook, yeah.
Now, of course, that movie is fictionalized in many ways, but that part is true, that there was a domain registration and there was a plot of digital earth that had 0 value before he got it. And because it had 0 value, there's no contention for it. But that plot of earth now has 4 billion backlinks coming into it.
Right. Okay. So
that's why exit is so important, and that's why I made the talk.
So I one interesting part is, in some ways, I want to get to your book in terms of I think the evolution of your ideas over the last 10 years, and we've had so many conversations.
Yes.
I actually wanted to start off this podcast by asking, are you in a secure location?
Sure.
But I think the evolution of your ideas, and I think of you, is just really fascinating because in some ways the book is kind of the culmination of, at least
over a decade.
a milestone in a journey.
Yeah.
So here you are, an academic, you're frustrated with the FDA, you're seeing it up close because you obviously founded a company, right? You make this talk. What gets you into crypto? And then what gets you into, thinking about wokeness? Because there's kind of the Balaji sphere, from 2013 expands dramatically from 2013 to where we are today. So what is that journey? Like, what was that? What led you down that path?
Great question. By the way, if you're in the browser, go to thenetworkstate.com.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, thenetworkstate.com.
Yeah, that's a website.
By the way, we have some free book. Everyone should get it. It's totally free. I think even the process of you writing the book, we'll get into the.
I guess I wanted to just ask, why start a country? Like, what's wrong with what we have? And why start it? Why now?
Well, okay. First, which one? Do you want to do that one, or do you want to do the one that's Sriram asked?
Both. Like, why do you start with what Sriram asked, and then we can come.
Okay. I'll do yours because I just forgot what Sriram asked, so I'll answer yours first. Okay. All right. So. Why start a country? Well, I have 4, intro little things on this, in 1,000 words and an essay and so on. But the short version is, why open a new document? Why have a blank sheet of paper? Why start a new company? Why have a bare plot of land? Why have, a child? Why have a new anything, right? And, the answer is, like, this is a fresh start. It's a clean slate, and it's, not necessarily clean slate always. There's some baggage from the old world, but the thing about this is it's something where there's a rebirth, and the value of that in at least the commercial realm, when you talk about a blank sheet of paper or a bare plot of land or a new company, how many billions of dollars are spent on, just incorporation alone each year?
Yeah. Yeah.
Clearly the frontier is valuable to people because you can build something new that nobody else cares about. You've just created it. It's yours at the time you create it. It's 100% yours.
Mhm.
Then, of course, over time, you can sell a piece of it, give it control, blah, blah, blah. Backlinks come in. I keep using the term backlinks because I think that's a very powerful way of thinking about, internet
Reputation.
stuff in general. Yeah, because it's not just links in from, Google's concept of backlinks is website A links to website B. But you can generalize that to political power. When you have a person over here, when they support a political leader, they, they're pointing to that political leader. And when they support a different one, they're pointing to a different one, right? When they're in a jurisdiction, they have a pointer to New York. And when they're out of that jurisdiction, they have a pointer to SF. And if they're between the two, they have pointers to both, right? And so when you start thinking about somebody as all the backlinks, all the things that they're pointing to, well, one of the reasons you want to do something new is you want something with no backlinks at all. Nobody cares about it. You can do whatever you want with it. You can screw it up. You can take risk. You can write a program and it can crash, right? If you can, A, create something new, and B, have nobody else affected by your failure, then C, you can take calculated risks. And without calculated risk, there is no reward. What's funny is that all the tax forms and stuff, they have a box for how much money you made, but what they don't have is how much risk you took to make that money.
That's a great line. By the way, one of Balaji's many skills is, I think, coming up with these amazing lines, which is kind of like, would stick in your head.
Yeah.
You're a man of many skills. And so I want to get to this. So the book and the journey to the book, right? So,
Sure.
Here you are.
How do you go from FDA to crypto?
Yeah, FDA to crypto to then books and, so many other things that you do. So there's going to be an expansion in the Balaji verse. How does that happen?
Sure. So also, I would just one small asterisk. I would never define myself as anti-woke, but post-woke.
Post-woke. Okay.
And the reason for that is, for example, we don't think of Indians today as anti-British, but post-British. They don't define themselves on the axis of being pro-anti-British. Even pro-British is obviously defined on the axis of Britain, but anti-British is implicitly defined by that as well. Perhaps you have to be that for a time to gain independence, but then you're moving on an axis that's different. And in fact, now India has decent relations with Britain.
And
It's
by the way,
basically, to your earlier point, it's V3.
Yeah.
It's a better
Rishi
way.
Sunak may, whatever.
Yeah.
might
I was
be-
going to say the next prime minister of Britain might be actually the multiple candidates, I think, they're running. Okay, but yeah, so back to you, post-work, but the Balaji verse expands. How does that happen?
How does that happen? So the thing is that, Thoreau has this great saying, which is, for 1,000, who are striking the branches of evil, there's one who's striking the root. Okay. And so, often that is like, you want Terminator vision on the whole space and you're like, there, right? Put all the energy there. And because you have finite energy, you have to, it's like allocation of resources, but of energy, right? And the thing is that it's, there's a lot of people who are interested in reform and editing of existing systems and so on and so forth. And that's less work in some ways because the system exists and so on, but it's much more work for less results in other ways. You're just adding a small little clause or whatever. Conversely, what I was thinking about with the strike the root aspect is, if Bitcoin wins, then all transactions are default legalized. Everything is willing buyer, willing seller.
Right.
Do you remember when you ran across Bitcoin in the first place?
Yes. I will say that. But basically, so what that means is you're not editing around one regulation or the other. You're at a stroke, putting a line through the entire legacy establishment of everything, because if two parties both want to opt out, they can opt out. Now, what'll happen is eventually you will rebuild new structures because people want something like a state. You will consensually re-centralize. But what you do is you just deprecate the entire legacy thing at one stroke, and you focus all your energies on that. Right now, by the resolution of these, the Hegelian synthesis, the V3, of the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, is there's something in the background, by the way. Can you hear it?
No? I can. We can. Yeah.
So, hold on, there's like a little
Wait,
echo.
are you getting an echo? I think.
Yeah, it's a small echo.
Let's try mute.
Okay, well, so let me try mute or unmute. Yeah, so basically, the V3 is, so V1 is just kind of fruitless reform. V2 is total exit. V3 is fruitful reform that enables exit. For example, the NSF acceptable use policy in 1991 was one of the most important policy decisions ever. You know why? You should unmute.
Yes. I no. Why?
Because it legalized commercial traffic on the internet.
Interesting.
Until 1991, the internet was for academics and it was for the military and so on. It was a very restricted network, and people fought the commercialization of the internet. And what they said there was going to be spam and malware and porn on the internet, and they were totally right. That did happen.
Yeah.
But you also got this massive, now the internet is like synonymous with commerce. Right.
Yeah. This is such an important point, because I think when we talk about crypto and Web3, I bring this up all the time, which is if you see, people point to, any of the bad behavior, right? I go back to the 90s, right? And there were all these panics about porn and scams and all the bad things that you can do on the internet.
Or even like, what is the practical application of the internet? Like, why do you want to be online when you can meet people physically? Or this was like a thing.
Give them a phone call, and people making fun of, like the @ symbol and email addresses. But out of that, came Google, came Wikipedia, came open source, and all these amazing things. Social media and all these things have changed the world. And I think the arc. And I really like the idea of like a clean line. The reboot is so important.
Yes, that's right. And so that connects the dots, right? Basically, to get to life extension, to get to transhumanism, to get past these obsolete regulations, we need to carve out at least some jurisdiction somewhere in the world where we can consensually experiment, your body, your choice, medical sovereignty. And do so in such a way that we've managed to get that jurisdiction in a peaceful way, as B, we have managed to do so in a high reputation way. And this is actually just as important, in fact, even more important. Like one of the things that India did, and I talk about this, they achieved, independence from the British nonviolently, right? Now you can argue various aspects of that, but overall, the premise of nonviolent independence is a really important one if you can do it. And I think just winning the moral battle, if you're against life extension, you want us to die, right? Win that moral battle first online, okay? People have to concede. Look, if you're for universal healthcare, you better be for life extension. If you're pro-life, you should probably also be for life extension.
Maybe the test you should ask people is there an age which you want people to die, because you want to help them, but you're not for the Bostrom living forever. So is that an acceptable age for everyone to die? But you use an interesting word which I don't think a lot of people are familiar with, transhumanism. Could you define what you mean by transhumanism?
Sure. It's basically what everything in tech will be focused on in about 10 years or so, maybe 5. Transhumanism is it's like human self-improvement with technology. So it's a very wide set of things that encompasses quantified self, like external devices. It's body modification. It is the super soldier serum stuff that the myostatin null and things like that. It is brain machine interface like Neuralink. It is nootropics like cognition enhancing drugs like the movie Limitless. It is genetic modification like CRISPR for genetic diseases, like sickle cell and other things are being treated with that, and so on and so forth. It is basically, it's a suite of, it's like AI used to augment human capabilities. It's bionics, right? It is telepresence. It's basically all the stuff which just powers up the human, limb regeneration, life extension, all that stuff is transhumanism. Now, the thing is, more recently, transhumanism has been attacked as something bad because people will say when it's transhumanism is just a change, and whether that change is good or bad, you know, are you going to create the island of mishappen, you know, humans or whatever, like Quasimodos, or, you know, as a function of this. And I understand that fear. And so the term that I use is optimalism. And I'm going to have a new chapter in the book on this. But optimalism is not maximalism. It's not fundamentalism. It's not just naive optimism either. It is like, you know, there's a stopping criteria. There's an optimal, like in the sense of optimization. And you're like, okay, I want to get optimal health and optimal fitness. And it implies, what is every have you guys done any optimization? Like,
I mean, it depends on what you mean by optimization.
Okay.
But I think we've kind of done the
like
median.
in your whole spectrum
maximize.
Of definition, there are like
I have an Oura ring. I've done some
okay,
work, all that fun stuff.
So if you do optimization, like in the sense of mathematical optimization, it's often
you mean
framed,
that?
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Yes,
got
of course.
it.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So it's often framed as constrained optimization, like
Sure.
maximize this function subject to these constraints, like this convex function subject to these convex constraints. It needs to remain within this polytope and, you know, attain its, you know, maxima or minima within that. Right.
Yeah.
And so what you do there is you actually are saying it's a practical thing, right? Optimalism acknowledges that practical constraints exist.
Yep.
And does the best we can within those constraints, pushing against those boundaries, but recognizing that practical constraints exist, as opposed to, I think, ideologies that don't have any built-in stopping criteria. And actually, many of them don't. You know, I use the example of, let's say, Westism. Suppose that you were a Westist. What is a Westist? A Westist is somebody who likes the idea of California. So keep going west. Keep going west. They get the whole group. They're like, we must go west. They go west. They go west. They're in California. And then somebody's like, we need to keep going west. What, you're not a Westist? You cuck, you know? And so they just keep going west.
I think there is a tie between this and, you know, Tom Holland's Dominion and wokeness, which is kind of the push towards, you know,
Extremes.
Christian values. And
there is
similarity there.
I will talk about that. Yeah. So basically, you know, within the Westist group, you know, you might be an Eastist, you know, like trader or whatever, unless you just kept going west into the Pacific Ocean and then everybody drowns. Right. And so that's a problem with the ideological direction, in my view, like left or right. You know, if you just keep steering a car left or right, that might be the correct direction at one moment, but you need to keep course correcting back and forth. And not be thinking, you know, too much is never enough, and, you know, so on. It may even turn out that you might need to make a hard turn one way or the other, or do things that don't fit to any one ideology. And the problem is that people only think in terms of direction, not destination, you know. And with the concept of exit, you now actually have a jurisdiction, a destination that you can carve out, and that you can say, go here. And it's not about the ideology, it's about the results.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's lots of things that, see, we know this in tech, but it's like not yet really understood. I should say not understood. It's not like baked into everything in politics. So basically, there's a huge difference in theory and practice. Okay. The entire 2x2 we've seen in tech. You've seen like a pitch, which looks really good, and where the person really executes. Okay. You've seen a pitch that looks really good, but the person doesn't execute. You've seen a pitch that looks really stupid, 140 characters. What? And then that changes the world. And then, of course, you've seen pitches that are really stupid and are actually really bad, right? But that
I guess, Balaji, the question then is, like, for transhumanism, what are those constraints that you're talking about? You know, like the way you see it is like, I like the framing around like optimization. So in the context of both like transhumanism as well as like when we talk about the network state, what are the constraints in your mind are like, okay, if we within this local maxima, if we operate, this is the optimal outcome. What is that for both of these?
Well, for transhumanism, the constraint is human biology, human cognition. You know, like what's funny is human nature doesn't change, but robot nature does. You know, like robots have gotten much, much more sophisticated. I mean, like with DALL-E and so on, that's actually really changing very quickly. And so the thing is that, you know, this axis of transhumanism versus anarcho-primitivism is like the Unabomber ideology, right? Degrowth, blow up everything, you know, go back to basically some idealized Eden. And this is very appealing to people because, you know, like we were hunter-gatherers for most of our existence, you know, on the planet, and we've only been farmers as humans for the last whatever 1,000 years, you know? And so like millennia of evolution if you ask somebody on the just from anywhere on the earth to draw a scene of the outside or just a scene, I've seen this cited. I'm not sure if it's been replicated, but I've seen it cited that they will draw usually one of two scenes, either A, like where they grew up in adolescence. Okay. Something like that, right? Or B, it'll be like a lake and then some like grass along the side and then like some trees behind it. Okay. And maybe
the savannah.
Watching,
the savannah. Like
yeah, not exactly the full savannah, but it's savannah with like some water, some fresh water. Okay.
Right.
Because that's like this sort of ancestral environment. And many different cultures have something that sounds a lot like Eden and the flood. And so you wonder if there's just like if you put down a beaver, they can build a dam, right? You put down a bird, they can build a nest. Okay. Put down a spider, they can build a web. In a sense, there's some fairly sophisticated memory encoded into that ACGT, right? Like literally you can have mutations in spiders where they mess up the spider web and so on. Okay. So in the same way, there's probably some kind of ancestral memory that we've got. How it's encoded, don't know. Okay. Where we're sort of optimized for like a certain kind of hunter-gatherer-ish thing, many of the genes, but that's like incompatible with modern times, yet we have a yearning for it, right? So one way of reconciling that, I think, is the digital nomad type of thing, which I think becomes more and more feasible for a larger percentage of folks where you just move around all the time. Like Vitalik is like a, basically peripatetic digital nomad. Right now it's expensive to do so, but I think that comes down in cost. I think eventually it flips and becoming a digital nomad is actually cheaper because, if you have crypto, you just rent everywhere and prices have crashed. And by being globally mobile, you actually get the best income for your life standard or for your skills at any time and so on and so forth. And now you have kind of the human desire of being able to roam and move, right? And that, of course, competes against the other human desire to be like patriotic and loyal and steadfast and I love the land and so on and so forth, right? Those are two tensions, like a yin and a yang, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing is that the anarcho-primitivist visualizes this Eden. I think they're unrealistic because they don't understand that you can't have 7 billion people foraging.
Yeah.
I would not. I would not last without DoorDash.
Yeah. But the thing is, you just without like quote industrialized agriculture and so on, without the the green revolution, you just don't have enough food to feed like one.
Right.
Like any of the people. You cannot have people go and forage. And you just defoliate the forest in like a day or something like that. It'd be the craziest thing in the world, right? Yeah. So the thing, anyway, point being that axis of transhumanism versus anarcho-primitivism is basically technology goes to infinity and we touch the stars and become 2.0, or reject it all entirely and go to zero. And there's an intermediate as well. There's always a synthesis. And I was just talking about this, but basically, that doesn't mean you always have to floor technology to infinity. Like San Francisco, for example, I believe in the internal combustion engine and I believe in the car and whatnot as a useful device. But San Francisco built this elevated highway that blocked the ocean, and disassembling that was good. Like, so you don't need to use tech on every single thing to the absolute max at all times. That's not actually what I'm saying. But there's like a good version of it, which is basically saying generally we should move forward and ascend and so on. And we will make wrong turns, but we should continue that. And not in the naive progressive way of everything always gets better all the time, but in the determined way of, like the Hilbert slogan. Hilbert's slogan? We must know, we will know. Right?
No,
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, of course, and someone will basically be like, oh, but, Gödel and completeness showed that we can't know everything. And so it's okay, sure. But we can know it to a pretty good approximation. And we can at least know that we don't know and whatnot, right? Like, there's.
So I want to kind of merge
constraints. Go ahead.
I want to merge some of these threads together, right?
Please,
so transhumanism. I think you made this point about wanting to be a nomad, which I think is kind of a good segue into your book. So I think everyone could go check out the book. I love it's free. I love the updating nature of it. I also love how you structured it. There is a if
One word, one line.
the one paragraph, 1,000 word, then there's a book, there's a chapter at the end. And maybe, Balaji, could you just tell us like the network state in one sentence? Because I think it's kind of a good jumping point to get into the book itself.
Sure. Why don't you click that one, the network state in one sentence?
Yeah, let's click the first one. There we go.
So a highly aligned online community with the capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. So that combines kind of like four concepts, right? So highly aligned online community that is not, when it's useful sometimes to define what something is by what it is not, right? Facebook is not a highly aligned online community. It is for 3-something billion people that have nothing in common other than clicking the button in the blue app. So Facebook is not a network state, right? Neither is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is people who hold, the BTC, but that's the only thing they have. They're not like highly aligned. They just have hundreds of millions of people. They in fact, the whole point of Bitcoin is quote decentralized and so on and so forth, right? And then a company is not really the same as a community. A company is one of the institutions which is allowed to have a membrane boundary around it and allowed to be selective. And because it is allowed to be selective, it is actually where people have sort of rebuilt to some degree community, over the last, 10, 20 years. Okay. But a company is not the same as a community. By the way, as distinct from, let's say, an apartment complex, which just has 1,000 people that don't know each other in there and can't select on the basis of communities. And yet as distinct from, let's say, Harvard or any college, which is an apartment complex that can select on the basis of alignment and identity, right? So actually, can you bring that definition back on screen?
Yeah, let's do that.
So highly aligned online community, number one, with a capacity for collective action, right? So now you might have a bunch of people who like believe in the same things. You've selected them on the moral basis of, whether it's carbs bad or, being well-dressed good or FDA bad. You have some premise like that. And the reason I say it in this sort of guttural, visceral way as X bad, Y good, is to sort of mirror how it works within our heads. You could say it in the sense of the Food and Drug Administration is, deleterious, right? But like X bad, Y good is sort of how like it's at that basal level, right? And you can go ahead. Yeah, it's polarizing in an important way, which is you're saying society has a deficiency that you are correcting with your society in the same way that if a startup company is correcting that moral, if a startup company is correcting a market deficiency with a technological innovation, a startup society is correcting a moral deficiency with a societal innovation. Okay. And so now that thing about capacity for collective action, you have this community, it has to actually be able to do things together. Now, you've heard the term state capacity.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the thing is, everybody just assumes the US government can do something. It basically can't. Anytime it wants to do X, then the other team doesn't want it to do Y for good reason. And then even when both teams get it together, it does bad things because it can only do popular things and not the unpopular things that are important things, Now,
by the way, one interesting point I think you made recently, I think this might be in the Bari Weiss essay that you wrote, is that this lack of state capacity, actually, so let me take a step back. I think some people might think about some of your writings and kind of define it as either anti-left or right. But I think one of the points you made on state capacity is actually it's almost like a bipartisan thing. Where the U.S. government, and I'm not sure whether everyone agree, but your assertion is that the lack of state capacity degradation is something which, in some ways, both sides, Team Red and Team Blue, seem to be winding up to push for.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing about it is, the normal concept of like, have you ever seen the political compass? Do you want to just put that on screen for a second?
This is a Balaji classic. Hold on, we'll find it in the political compass. Let me find it and pull it up on screen.
Let's see if we can find this, right? So here, I'll get the clean political compass. Here we go.
Political compass.
Here, I've got the image. I just found it.
All right. Or the Wikipedia page is good.
He just posted it on the.
Yeah, here we go. Okay. There we go.
Okay. So, normally people talk about like horseshoe theory, right? Yeah. And the thing about that is
So very quickly, horseshoe theory is the idea that the extremes of both the left and the right actually wind up merging, right? But let's focus here on the political compass.
That's right. So normally people say, oh, communists and fascists become the same thing. They become tyrannical, right? Or tyrannical. And there's this great film called The Soviet Story, which actually shows, if I recall correctly, a bunch of Nazi and Soviet posters during the same time period. They look very, very similar. It's like it's almost like these guys are copying each other. You can almost see, oh, they're doing this propaganda. We'll do it with a slightly different slogan, right? And so if you take the top left and the top right, and you identify top left with hold on just one second. I'm just gonna.
By the way, I think the horseshoe theory is something which is actually super interesting because there's this great study about how online advertisers on both sides, some of the edges of both sides actually are similar.
Yeah.
For example, you kind of see this
like Goop and.
I think there was a study once that the Goop and Alex Jones, actually shared advertisers at one time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, basically it was the same thing, and Goop advertised it as like
anti-vaxxer kind of thing.
It basically was like female coded and male coded. It was like raw gorilla energy or whatever was the Alex Jones version, and the the Gwyneth Paltrow version was like goddess mindset or something. I don't know, something like that, right?
Yeah.
But so coming back here, so if top left is communist, top right is Nazi, bottom left woke, bottom right maximalist. That's how I kind of think about it. Okay. And so the top left and top right, they meet in tyranny. Okay. But the bottom left and the bottom right meet in anarchy. And so you can actually think of it not as just a horseshoe, but actually as like a figure eight.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because what does the woke say? The woke says everyone is equal. We are all equal. And the maximalist says, you ain't the boss of me. And both of those, what do they have in common? No hierarchy.
Yep.
Right? No order is legitimate. Everything is flat. Destroy all existing structures. And I understand where that comes from, honestly. I do. I do understand where that comes from. However, that's also a recipe for anarchy. Which is, which is not good. And then on the other, it's so I have this figure in the book. Hold on, let me actually, I want to make a few more figures, but here's a figure in the book. Here, if you put this on screen.
There we go. That's the chat. By the way, I love how dynamic and online your book is. There are graphs. It keeps getting updated.
Just wait. I've got so much more. All the embed stuff. Basically, I had to do a bunch of stuff which was like Kindle only, but I've got all kinds of little code snippets and stuff like that coming. So,
okay, let's see. We have a link.
Yeah, let's just keep going.
Oh yeah. No, you got it. There you go.
Oh, there we go. We got it. Yeah.
All right. Scroll down a little bit. Okay, yeah, so right there. Okay, so the reason I kind of set this triangle in this way is it actually maps exactly to the political compass. Okay. NYT, woke, lower left. BTC, maximalist, lower right. CCP, it's like communist nationalist, right? They're basically they're ultra nationalist communists. They're the top middle. There's pure authoritarian, right? And this is actually, see, the thing is, many people get today's setup wrong. Like people, the NYT is and the Antifa and Antifa and stuff like that in the lower left corner are constantly denouncing this ghost opponent in the top right of the Nazis, which isn't really there. And then increasingly, you'll see folks on the right who are talking about the communists, and they'll say I'm a communist disrespecter and so on in the top left, and they will identify. Of course, the CCP calls themselves communist, and the NYT is publishing articles that are sympathetic to communism. But the NYT, they're actually really wokes, and the CCP, even though they call themselves communists, are really at least half nationalist. Okay. And so when you see this, basically, so this is one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is the bottom left and top middle are centralized, and the bottom right is centralized. Right? So you have the US establishment centralized, you have the Chinese establishment, they're centralized, and you have BTC, which is decentralized. Okay. So you can do a lot of algebra with this kind of thing and just kind of think of these factions. They're almost like magnetic poles or electrical charges, like gravitational things that pull things in different directions. So the common message of, bottom left and bottom right, I mean, those two are just going to go right at each other. One of the things about this, by the way, is each of these different symbols is a source of truth for like probably about 1 billion people.
Yeah. By the way, I was just thinking that this diagram is probably going to get my channel banned from YouTube at some point in time, right? I would
It's
blame
possible.
you,
I feel like we'll just put away a hard drive with this video because it's never going to exist anywhere online.
Sure.
So I want to get to Vitalik. Wrote a long review
A mini book on your book.
Yeah. On your book last night, and I think he kind of had two questions or commentary which I want to get to. Which I think one of the things you talk about as necessary for a network state is a need for a founder, like a founding figure of sorts. And I think so. Why is that? Why does it need a singular person, for this to exist?
Good question. So, and I actually have some thoughts on like exit to community and whatnot that Vitalik talked about, right? So, I kind of think, from our experience in tech and just anybody who's even done like a school project of any kind, you basically, if you give something to N people, it just doesn't get done. If you give something to one person, it might get done, has a chance of getting done. And, there's 1,000 essays on the need for leadership and CEOs. And, Ben talks about like how 2 CEOs are bad and so on and so forth. Like, if you build a human organization of any scale, you will see the need for leadership and a decision maker, a conflict resolver, an arbitrator of some kind, right? On the other hand, not only, even though humans need leadership to get something done, humans also often don't like leadership because leadership can veto them or do something to them, et cetera. So the counter to that is, I want to say in this thing because, it has power over me and so on. And I'm sympathetic to that as well. And, what Vitalik talks about, so the short answer is, why do you need a founder? You basically need a leader to get something done, to get something started. Ethereum had a founder, Bitcoin had a founder, pretty much anything we can think of basically had that, right? Okay. But there's the other aspect, which is, does the founder have to carry the burden forever? What if, at first nobody cares about it, but then everybody cares about it if it's successful? If everybody cares about it, don't they get a stake in it? And so I think, so what Vitalik proposed and what people have talked about is, quote, exit to community. And this is a little bit like, a long, wary tech founder being able to finally sell their company and do something else, right? This actually does benefit the founder sometimes, and the community seems like they can get a piece of it and now maintain it and so on and so forth. And now you go to a more bureaucratic maintenance structure or what have you. And in some ways, I actually think this is okay, but it's like the maturity to death phase of the organism, because it's no longer able to really do something unpopular and innovate. It is just basically executing on the scripts it already had. Innovation requires unpopular thought. It requires this kind of, founder kind of person who is not a joiner, but a leaver. The founder leaves and does something new, right? Yeah. Whereas all the people towards the end in the bureaucratic thing are the ones who want to run a large organization, which is very different than starting a small one, right?
Yeah.
And so exit to community has, there's negative in terms of bureaucracy. There's a positive in terms of allowing the founder to get something out, or not just money, but really just get their time back. And there's also, in theory, a positive for the community because they now have some slice of control and so on and so forth. However, I actually think that exit to world is much better than exit to community.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? So that means fully open sourcing it. So with the founder, there was one leader. Exit to community, you've now got a bureaucracy of N leaders. And when you exit to world, you fully open source it, you make it public domain, anybody can fork it and do whatever they want with it. And now it is something which you've made it public domain, right? So rather than giving it to a bureaucracy to run, you give it to the world to build on. You open source it. Right?
But do you not have the same problem as you initially talked about, which is like you need a founder, you need like a
You do, but that founder is now you've got something which is free to everybody and everybody can add value on top of it. It's become so valuable, people want to build on it. Let me give a concrete example. AT&T Unix. Okay. AT&T Unix was a super valuable thing that one company or a few folks invented. And, they like proved it out and so on. And then everybody used it so much that it became so valuable that the open source version of it, aka, Linux and BSD, is now something we take for granted as free. It's exit to world, right?
Yeah.
And you can fork it and do whatever you want with it, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the history of all the Unix forks and whatnot, this is like this thing which looks like early Christianity or like crypto, where it's important enough that, you have like the major BSD forks and it root philosophical disagreements on like what a computer is supposed to do and what the prioritization is. And you can actually generalize this. You think about a lot of stuff when you think about open sourcing something, we have a paradigm for that. You think about putting something in the public domain, we have a paradigm for that. It's like, okay, I give up all further control, right?
Yep.
So I think full control works, founder control works. And I think exit to world works. I am mostly skeptical about exit to community in the sense that I think it's okay, right? But I think in general, if you're doing that as a founder, I understand why it benefits a founder, to have like a sale of some kind. That's okay. I understand why they want to have a bureaucratic group running it and so on. But from an ethical standpoint, eventually you want to get to exit to world, in my view, right? So because Vitalik in that post is talking more about the ethics of it than the practical aspects, that's what I'd say is like, there's kind of something that's even more than that. Go ahead.
So I think the other pushback from Vitalik, and I think we've discussed this a few times also, is one way to, I think, read the very core thesis of your book is you basically have all these countries and you're kind of populating them from the cloud, but one assertion could be that you are still dependent on the geopolitics, the infrastructure of the countries that you live in. And for example, if you're living, anywhere near Russia, right, and at some point in time, Russia might come in and roll some tanks over the border and try and do something bad to you. Or if you're living anywhere near, say, China, you're under the Chinese sphere of influence. So how do you think about? I would say, can you, for example, when you fork a version of Unix, it's not like the other Unixes can then like send an army after you and throw you in jail. But in this case, when you're having a network state, you're still living in a physical piece of land, which has, scary people with guns and tanks.
No, wait. So I want to contest one key point there.
Okay.
You're not living in a physical piece of land. You're living in a set of them. Actually, can you go and pull the network state in one image?
Hold on, in your book, right? Yeah. Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
In one image. Yeah.
In one image.
Third link. Okay. So this, if you zoom in on this a little bit, or should be zoomable. So basically this shows like what a 1 million person network state would look like. Okay. And so the concept is you actually have, so the key difference with all the so you remember how my thing about the V3, how the V3 has aspect, right? So city state, nation state, network state. Okay. City states were the V1. They were located in a physical location. Because they were in a single physical location, they could be invaded. And they were. And in fact, that's why nation states as we know them exist. They're these giant roll-ups, as we put it in tech, like a consolidation, a merger, an acquisition, an invasion, whatever, of lots and lots of little principalities into like these giant entities, right? And that's, that's Garibaldi, and that's Bismarck, and that's, the French Revolution, and that's, the unification of India and this unification of China, and so on and so forth. It's like all these great empires have this like unifying figure that like pulled all the territory together and knitted it together and so on, right? And, we have things like, San Marino, for example, is in the United Nations, but it's like a duckbill platypus. It's like this missing link, which Garibaldi spared when he was reunifying Italy, because, so if you Google San Marino, or if you, actually, this is great. Good. You got this here. Okay. We have this going for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
What was San Marino? San Marino is, it's like a 30,000 person tiny thing in the middle of what we think of as Italy. That's like a piece of the past.
Yeah.
that's like made all the way into the future. It's like a living dinosaur. Okay, it's like shows what city states used to be, and it illustrates the point that you were making, which is that small thing. If Italy wanted to, it could easily invade it,
Mhm.
right? And in fact, this was the ultimatum. As the big union got bigger and bigger, it would have more leverage on the small ones, and it's basically like join or die. A different version of Ben Franklin's thing of join or die. This is like join or, you know, we will invade you, right? This was actually also the argument that India used, that you know, to reunify. Do you know about the princely states?
Yep,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Okay, well, many non-Indians don't know about that. You want to talk about that?
Well, I think what Balaji is talking about is, you know, like India achieved independence
Post-independence.
from the British in 1947, but post that era, you know, and I think Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who's kind of a famous Indian statesperson, was kind of really key to this effort.
Yeah.
Brought together a bunch of these states were essentially
These
ruled
small
by
kingdoms.
small kingdoms, which had these kind of traditional kings ruling it. And, you know, and the various ones which kind of had like various dynamics around it, but ultimately brought it all under what we consider as India today, right? And some of them have some legacy things, you know, but they
And
kind
then
of,
the boundaries of state
Yeah,
and
yeah.
having like a central government and
yeah,
all
but
of
they
that
all lost
stuff.
sovereignty and they all became part of like what we think of as the Indian
yeah.
the Indian state today. But yeah, go on.
That's right. That's right. And so the thing is that unification process on India, and actually something sort of similar on China with much more violent and nasty, means in many ways where we're headed for is like a decentralized West and a centralized East.
Mhm.
India and China are in their centralization arc, and the West is in its decentralization and fragmentation arc.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like civilizations have like a heartbeat and a life cycle and an ebb and
Yeah.
flow and so on and so forth, right? And India is for the first time like a unified country
Mhm.
in a way that it really was never. It was a civilization, but it was never a single, like, you know, like
So
thing.
let me ask you about this
Right.
then, because I think there's a good segue to this, which is you obviously been spending a lot of time thinking about India and talking about India and Indians separately, and you sometimes make this decision.
Yeah.
Give us your view about India and Indians sitting here in July 2022.
Okay, so it's possible, by the way, that there's some issue like Sri Lanka or something like that, where there's some financial issue with the Indian state that messes it up. So I want to caveat, you know, that it's, you know, it is possible that there's something like the 1991 economic, you know, crisis that
Yeah.
hopefully, if it does happen, results in economic liberalization. And I think that's probably, you know, that's a possibility, not a 100%. But in general, the way I think about it is I'm very moderately bullish on India, but very extremely bullish on Indians. So it's almost opposite of China in the sense of, you know, China is mainly the Chinese state, and then it also has the Chinese diaspora around the world, right? If you think of China, you think about the Chinese state. When you think about India, I think you think about the Indian network, right? If you go back to my like God state network kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, and then if you extend it out 10 or 20 years, and of course it's a projection, but we'll see. I have a feeling that, you know, for what China's doing is creating like the all-seeing AI god.
Yep.
Like something that truly knows if you be naughty or nice, a combination of Santa Claus and, you know, like Sauron, right? And that's a good line, I guess.
That's actually there's a connection there between Santa Claus and Sauron, which I never thought about before. But yes, all seeing.
Right? All seeing like this, right? And of course, the thing is that in the West, all the sticks are shown, but there's actually also carrots within China. Like the higher your social credit, you know, the more you get on buses. It's basically like being in good stature with the, you know, the establishment. You know, America also has a social credit score. Just, you know, cancellation is decentralized, you know, social credit, right? You hadn't thought of that?
Okay.
Never thought about it that way. That's awesome.
Yeah. Basically, actually, one of the points I make in the book is actually there's many parallels, many convergences, just like the Nazis and Soviets converged, right? In many ways, the wokes and the CCP converge on key things. There's cancel culture and human flesh mobs. There's surveillance of the internet. There is state control of giant tech companies. There is a deplatforming, censorship, an unpersoning of regime critics. There is, you know, this bellicose buildup of militarization. there's actually, unfortunately, a lot of commonalities. Of course, there's differences.
Mhm.
Fundamentally, the Chinese are ethno-nationalists, like for the Han, and the wokes are ethno-masochist, which is like white people are the worst, right? So Chinese people are the best and white people are the worst. That's essentially, white people go to the back of the line for vaccines officially in America, right? That's like state policy, and that's like, rather than either of these sort of like racialist extremes, crypto, Web3 pseudonymity is like a third way, right? Where people are judged universally on the basis of their merit, neither discrimination nor cancellation, and it's globally fair and uniform. And actually, many Americans and many Chinese would also actually prefer that rather than ultra nationalism or ultra wokeness. Just like basically rule of law and not focusing on these ineradicable characteristics, right?
Yeah.
So what? How do I think about it? If China is the Chinese state and they're leaning into AI, India is really going to be about, I think, the decentralized network. Sinic centralization and dharmic decentralization.
Wait, hold on.
Wait, what?
Slow down and say that again.
SINIC, Sinic centralization, dharmic decentralization. So like one
Balaji,
state.
you in another timeline, you have a career as a rapper, like dropping bars, because your ability to rhyme things which make sense is unparalleled.
All right. So the thing is,
are like amazing. They're just great.
I appreciate that. So the thing is that many, Westerners are sort of used to like essentially an Abrahamic world,
Yes.
Judeo-Christian and so on. And look, I think there's a lot, obviously, that these cultures have contributed to the world and so on. Have you ever seen the graph of like the geocenter of the world economy?
I don't think so.
No.
Okay, hold on. Let me bring this up.
This is an episode where we get schooled by Balaji.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of
This is
Googling.
like-
By the way, I have to say, I was talking to a former coworker of Balaji who shall remain unnamed, and I think anybody who spent time with Balaji, and I count myself as one of them, has this experience where Balaji kind of pull up Wikipedia and there are like 5 different links during a conversation, and you're like, how are you doing this, right? It's such a common thing. Like I remember one of the first time we talked to you, did this, and you were like, you know what a struggle session is, and you pulled up this 1950s page from China and so on. So anyway, sorry, go on.
Right. That's right. And it's basically, it's like how I sort of I store things in a few characters so I can just have a lookup table kind of, but basically, if you take a look at, do you see this graph? Okay, great. Yes, it's on the screen for a second. So this is, of course, the estimates of like what GDP was in 1,000 or 1,500 or 1820. Those are all approximations. But the fact that Columbus wanted to get to India, the fact that those trade routes, like we can see, okay, there clearly was something going on there, right? Why would he wouldn't want to get somewhere unless there was actually trade or, money to be made, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing is that, the entire post-war era is set up when GDP is basically, you see where it's 1940, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, right? That entire period, that's where all these institutions are set up. That's what everybody thinks is constant. Yeah. But the entire Abrahamic world, is yielding now a lot of its energy. And this is actually a kind of an older graph. It's moved dramatically already. To these other two gigantic cultures, the dharmic and the sinic, which have sort of different value systems, right? And it goes like, you can go on about this forever, but like as just so here, let me give kind of like one version of it, and people will probably shoot at me or whatever on this. Okay, so
this video is definitely not.
It's not on YouTube at this rate, right? Like we're definitely getting canceled.
Fine. So right. So let's take, the Abrahamic model of, you have sins or you do good things in one life, and then you either go to heaven or go to hell. It's like one shot deal, right? Infinite or zero, right? Okay. And that's one way, by the way, if you believe that, it's one way of stabilizing society, because the Pascal's wager thing, even though it's, mocked or attacked or whatever, if you actually get people to believe it, it's like decentralized law enforcement. Why? If people believe that they're actually going to hell if they do something wrong, then it's kind of like, okay, God is always watching, so I better be a God-fearing man, and so on and so forth. Okay.
Yep.
And so, you can, like, basically, given that assumption, that software in people's heads, if they genuinely believe in hellfire and brimstone and whatnot, they will behave in a certain way, right? Okay.
Mhm.
Now, then there's the dharmic model, which is you have dharma and you have karma. And if you do your duty, you gain karma. And if you don't, you lose karma. And in the next life, you're born to a higher status or lower status based on that. And that's like the iterated game model. Okay.
Mhm.
And you can argue with this, of course. I'm just saying this is how historically it was justified. And that's something where it's not a one-shot deal, it's a multiple shot deal. Okay. And then you have the Cynic model, which is that you have, it's often ancestor worship. It's just like rear wheel drive. It's like looking rearward, right? And it's basically saying, respect what our ancestors, and that's the way that that's a way of preserving the order by saying, make the ancestors proud, filial piety, make my family proud, and so on and so forth. And you preserve the order going in reverse, right? Mm-hmm. So, that's just like, obviously there's pieces of that have made it to the modern day. There's pieces of that have been thrown away or what have you. But that just kind of gives like three different sort
broad
of
mental picture. Yeah.
Okay. I want to
wait. I still want to talk about why are you then bullish on Indians?
Oh, why? Well, the thing is, I think, look, there's about 5 million Indians, and you probably add, the broader South Asian set as well. But about 5 million Indians have made it to the US, UK, Canada, Australia. Okay. And have done quite well. I mean, really well. You're talking Satya, you're talking Sundar, you're talking, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, and, many other really legit tech CEOs and founders, like Shantanu Narayanan of Adobe and Twitter CEO, all Parag, all these people. And in politics, you have, Kamala Harris, obviously VP. You have who's half, but still, it's you have. I'm not saying it's half credit or whatever. I'm just saying people.
Yeah, there's this whole meme about you kind of about how you become like an Indian founder becomes CEO or somebody becomes Indian CEO. But sorry, so going back, so why are you
sure?
Indian?
That's also So as I'm coming to Indians have done quite well recently in politics, in media, in entertainment, in finance, in law. You have Rishi Sunak, and Priti Patel in the UK. You have the Taoiseach of Ireland is of Indian descent, if I recall correctly, a while back. I think he's now no longer there, but he was. It was Leo Varadkar, right? Was the Indian or half Indian? Was he Indian or half Indian? I think he was. Am I wrong about that? No, yeah, that's right. Yes, so was the Taoiseach of I'm probably mispronouncing that. Let's say the leader of Ireland.
My dad, like some other Indian parents back in the day, he would look at anybody and he'd be like, the first thing when somebody becomes CEO, one Indian person, all of us get a WhatsApp message from our parents saying like, did you just see that this person became CEO?
It's both the sense of pride and also the sense of like, so what are you going
what
to
have you done
in your life?
Yeah, actually,
why are you not? So a lot of Indians have become very successful in the West, right?
But here's the thing. That's the advanced scouts.
Yeah.
Right? That is actually the leading edge of what is to come. Okay? Because, my friend Akshay has this great one-liner. This is not mine. I credit to Akshay. Akshay of Super Team, actually.
Akshay BD, who is definitely worth following. Yes.
Great guy. Yeah. So he has this line, which is Indians no longer need the H-1B visa. They have the TCP/IP visa. Okay. So even as like immigration is getting locked or whatever, and harder to get in some ways, kind of doesn't matter because so much work has moved online. So much work is remote. Cryptocurrency is there that I think over the next, outsourcing has not begun. Okay. Like it has not begun. Like, just like, the internet has not begun in some ways, like the true impact of what global free markets mean, global free speech means, the true impact of that, among other things, like, over the last 5 years, the American press is very much turned inward. With the exception of Ukraine, you almost never hear about anything happening outside. It's always some stupid domestic political battle and so on and so forth, right? So most people don't know that about 1 billion Indians have gotten online over the last 5 years, not just online, but on, LTE, like I think 4G or 5G LTE, and some of the cheapest service in the world, so they can see like high bandwidth, high definition movies in like rural India.
By the way, I think this is really profound, because when I go to India these days, like there was a time when I think in the early 2000s when we were in the US, the state of the internet, the state of payments, was generally ahead in the US. But these days, when I go to India,
way ahead.
Yeah, you're going to see, like, for example, people on the street watching broadcasts at like full fidelity, payments, contactless payments, where like in India a lot before. There's they're so ahead in so many capabilities and what we experience in the US today.
Oh yeah, no, I mean the thing is that they also didn't have the existing infrastructure to compete with it, and so it's something where you just go directly to that
you
level.
could skip the desktop PC and go straight to the
leapfrog.
Yeah,
mobile
which is
phone.
what
You
happened to
leapfrog.
like a lot of our relatives and stuff.
Yeah.
That's right. So now here we go. So basically, what is totally underpriced, what I don't think anybody is actually thinking about, I should say anybody, but like, yes, there's a 10 or 12 hour time zone difference, but those billion-something Indians have been lurking and like acculturating themselves and learning like American memes and Western memes. And when they type with a Western accent. They may speak with an Indian accent, but they type with a Western accent. That's new. They don't say, "Can you do the needful?" and so on and so forth, right? Like nothing wrong with that, but they are now much more acculturated. Okay. And what that means is that the previous generation had to have technical skills of engineering or medicine to move across borders. But now lots of quote soft skills. That's why
culture, like assimilation of culture.
Yeah, exactly. Like the sort of canonical Indian position in tech is CTO. It's like, actually, if you look, it's like even more than CEO. CTO is like Substack is an Indian CTO and Clubhouse is an Indian CTO. That's like just the go-to kind of thing, like the Indian CTO, right? I think even like Silicon Valley, HBO, whatever. It's like almost a caricature, whatever. So, so that's because technical skills are portable, but now the cultural skills are getting there really fast. And you have a generation of, high school students that has just spent 4 years in the school of the internet. And every single verbal job that's done in the West can now be done in India. So verbal outsourcing hasn't even begun. Okay.
Interesting.
So like Brooklyn's wokest, all the blue checks are going to sound like blue collars. I'm actually much more sympathetic to the blue collars. The blue collars saw all their jobs going to China, but lots of blue checks are going to see massive competition from India. And many of them are going to actually become like openly racist as a consequence, I believe. Like it'll be something that'll be a big thing over the next 5 or 10 years. Whereas others will like embrace this. And I like the entry of Indians into the English internet in a massive way is just completely unpriced on every dimension. Because one way of thinking about it actually is the phone is a new franchise. Like, the extension of the franchise to like women and minorities and so on over the 20th century is this thing that's been written about so much. But billions of smartphones give all of these previously mostly voiceless Indians a say on the global stage. India is locked out of the UN Security Council, right? France has a seat on the Security Council, right? India doesn't have a seat at the IMF, okay? But the Indian network is going to roar.
So I want to ask you this. A lot of people who are going to watch this will be Indians. So if you are a 20-year-old Indian watching this on YouTube, what advice do you, Balaji, have for him or her?
So if you are of a technical mindset, learn computer science and statistics. Okay. Why those two? Because that's upstream of programming and data science. And that allows you to operate in any field. Okay. You can go into airlines, and airlines, they have data structures on flights and passengers and so on. And they have algorithms that process those, and they'll collect data, and then you'll analyze that with stats, right? You could go into a totally different space. You could go into, retail or something like that. Okay. And you're going to have SKUs like shopping cart, numbers and, or let's say stock keeping units, right?
Your fungible set of skills or jobs that you can go like parlay
That's right.
skill set into.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Because every area now has algorithms and has data structures. So it needs computer science and needs statistics. This is the skill set that is to our period what physics was to the early 20th century. Like the physicists could go in to all of these previously sort of phenomenological organizations, like kick in the door and like write down some basic equations and systematize it. Luria and Delbruck famously did this with biology. They just counted things where people hadn't counted before. And then that kind of all changed with disciplinary fragmentation the second half of the 20th century. But now it's kind of come back. And because much of our life, right, much of what we're doing is looking at screens all the time.
Yeah.
Right. How much of your life is spent looking at a screen, Sriram? What percentage of waking hours?
No comment, right?
All right.
There's some topics we will not discuss.
Some topics we will not discuss. Okay. So, but for many people, it's like more than 50% of their waking hours are spent looking at a screen. Yeah. So while I believe in physics, while I do think you should know physics and chemistry and biology, that's still important. All the transhumanism stuff requires that. More and more of human experience will be within digitally constructed worlds. And those worlds are, the metaverse stuff, the AR, all of that is constructed by computer science and stats, right? Yep. So on the technically inclined side, that's what I'd say. Okay. If you're on the verbally or artistically inclined side,
you're a word still, not a shape rotator.
Yeah. Though, of course, you should be both, right? Like you should, develop some talents, right? So let me see if I can phrase this the right way. Some people choose when they have access to the global internet and they have access to all of these people who are online, like, all these investors and CEOs and, like managers and so on, to troll them. Okay. Some people choose to do this. Why? Because it gets attention. It gets a rise.
I think that's where the sentence was going.
Yeah. I don't. Okay.
So some people choose to do that. I would advise not doing that, and instead, because it's almost like like a little boy in school likes a girl and punches her, to show that he likes her or something. Like often people do this. Like Paul Graham has written that sometimes your biggest fans can be your biggest haters or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So my point is that if you are of a verbal bent, rather than trolling people on social media, which will get likes, that's the reason people do it. Right? Just attacking and being cynical and so on and so forth. Instead, try to figure out, I know this sounds cliche, but it's actually it's really not. Try to figure out how to add value. Okay. What does that mean? Basically, write content. And so you can start by writing even just a simple blog post or something like that. That is, you want to break into some field. Okay. Or you want to get the attention of some person. Write something that is potentially of value to them. Now, this is very counterintuitive because, if you're young, you might be like, oh, this investor is super rich. Why do they need any more value? Why am I adding value to them, et cetera? But the thing is that quote rich guy has 100 or 1,000 people asking them for money on like a daily basis constantly, right? So like, okay, of course it's their job or whatever, but it's like if they said yes to everybody, they would have no money, right? So the person who has something in their inbox saying, oh, here's a graph of something that I thought you might like, or here's a program I wrote that does X, Y, and Z, or here's, you were talking about India, here's some, new graphs from the Economic Survey of India. I'm not saying, by the way, kids who are watching this, don't do this exactly thing to me or whatever, but just as a concept, right?
Balaji's going to get a bunch of inbound graphs. By the way, I think, I think one of the most valuable things that anybody can give another human being is a new model or a framework to look at the world.
Yeah.
And if you, and I think if you are that person who, and Balaji, and I think it has been the originator of more than one for me personally. And if you can actually give somebody a piece of signal or give somebody a framework, a 2x2 graph or a Wikipedia page, which makes you go, right? That is incredibly, incredibly valuable.
Yes, I agree. And those new models, they shape how you kind of sort and process information, right? That's why, but to return to your point, so for the verbally inclined, that's the first step. But then here's the second step. I mentioned this about 18 months ago, but it's already, I think, really starting to play out. You know how India for a long time, maybe still to some extent, has China envy and like US admiration or US envy, right? Like India would copy China and China would copy the US or whatever. And everyone's kind of behind for like last 20 years, kind of being like that, right? I think now that the US is like much less admirable, China's not copying the US anymore. It's kind of going its own direction. And India actually can also go its own direction in some ways. And one of the things I think is a very important thing for the verbally inclined or artistically inclined in India is to realize that India can, and I think will, become a media superpower. Now, when I said this 18 months ago, people thought, they were like, dude, I like Bollywood, but come on, let's be realistic, right? Like it's not gonna beat Hollywood or whatever anytime soon. Come on, let's be real. And I'm not talking about Bollywood. Bollywood is fine, but I'm talking about what comes after that, right? So the thing is that this, in the same way that China ascended from making plastic stuff at Walmart to going up the value chain to like assembling iPhones, and now they're doing the entire thing for cutting edge drones and electric cars, and they're competitive in everything, right? And India has ascended the value chain from Java body shops doing like Y2K coding 12 hours on an offset to software consultancy, Tata type stuff, to now actually being number 3 in tech unicorns. In media, the sophistication and acculturation with the West is going to mean the potential for what I think of as a bright sun to the West's black mirror. Because
Great line. Great line.
So India is ascending with technology. It's the ascending world. And, Brooklyn's wokest are the descending world. And it's not rich for...
What's a good example of that? Like when you say ascension in the context of media in India, what does that mean?
I think I have an example here. I think Balaji said not Bollywood, but actually, if you look at the last year, there have been these huge
RRR.
I was going to say RRR. Right? I was like, RRR is kind of this huge Indian blockbuster. If you're not watched it, go check it out. I think it's on Netflix or any streaming service, and it is this huge hit. Hollywood style budgets, and it's kind of like it's kind of like how South Korea has kind of seen this cultural resurgence with things like Squid Game and Parasite, but India is also seeing this with RRR and a bunch of other movies. So that is the example I was going to use.
So I'm not saying that. I mean, so first of all, it is. I should be more clear. It's not just Bollywood. Bollywood alone wouldn't get you there. But here's the thing. There's an entire new domain of content creation, and it is Web3, and it's VR, and it's AI video. And when you combine those, right, you basically have something which plays to the Indian strength of like computer programming and so on, right? Because all of those are right. But it's also something where you have green field, right? Why did Indians get to senior roles in software companies? Because there's a new industry. Right. Vinod Khosla was such a pioneer because why was he a big dog? Because he founded the company. Guess what? He might not have gotten promoted to such a level, but he could found it. And when you're talking, there's not that many times that like totally new content verticals or totally new currencies and so on open up. Web3 and AI video and AI video editing and metaverse type stuff. Like if you are verbally inclined, you should write scripts for those scenarios, right? You should write scripts for what comes after Hollywood movies. They're like immersive VR environments. You should start thinking about what comes after Hollywood movies. There are 140-second clips, the things we're already seeing on Twitter and so on. You would basically build the entire thing such that it's not 2-hour movies, but 140-second clips, and maybe you monetize them with some crypto thing, right? As opposed to pay to view. Right. And the thing about this is, if China was a tech and manufacturing superpower, I think India, with the China, because it's building things and it's building tech companies. I think India becomes a tech and media superpower. Because it's only okay at manufacturing. It's gotten better at that, but it's actually, I think, can be world class in media. And when I mentioned that, just to connect the dots to the previous point. The 5 million Indians abroad, as I mentioned, are the advanced scouts. Okay. How many people with that talent level are there back in India? This might be the single most important unknown question in the world right now.
Right.
Okay. I want to take this to a different space. Balaji, when the movie about your life is inevitably made, who's the actor who should play you when the movie about you is made?
It's all AI. It's me.
Great. Great. I like how prepared he was for that. Okay, so I think when the movie of your life is made, the singular incident which will get talked about is you predicting COVID, right? And for those of you who don't know, Balaji basically writes this tweet. This is timestamp Jan 30th, 2020. And by the way, one of the amazing things I think I always appreciate about Balaji is everything is timestamp, fact checked. You can always link back, check it, and whether it's right or wrong. So you write this tweet on Jan 30th, 2020, when, just trust me, nobody in the United States was paying attention to the coronavirus. I don't think the word COVID-19 had even been coined at that point in time. And you write this tweet saying, hey, this thing is going to be a pandemic and it's going to cause, I'm just going to read this out, border closures, nationalism, social isolation, preppers, remote work, face masks, distrust in government. I remember this very well because
it sounded
I
really
argued with
extreme.
you at that point in time saying this sounds ridiculous. And folks, I mean, you have to realize how ridiculous this sounded. And this is the equivalent of the Christian Bale character in The Big Short saying that this market is going to collapse. Everyone thinks you're nuts, but then you immediately call it. So what caused you to write this tweet, and maybe walk us through what happens? And because in the history of somebody calling it and getting it right, like something, a deep in the money call option, in a way which nobody expects, this is up there.
Well, by the way, if you go back to that tweet for a second and you scroll
look at
down,
the second one.
Yeah, if you just scroll down a little bit, like I actually explain my reasoning, but even more than that, I give, there's certain things I was, again, you have to warp your head back to that time. But if you scroll down a little bit further, I was talking about how everybody might wear face masks.
Yep.
Okay. Now today that might seem like that seems so obvious, but at the time, the way it was very much a prediction. And if you go back a little bit further, go forward, down a little bit. So yeah, Facebook, right. So I said when Silicon Valley and China both agree on something, it often happens. Face masks are on the rise due to infection and pollution. Privacy is their driver. Every American man used to wear a hat. Perhaps everyone wears a face mask soon. And the thing about this was, that's my friend Jameson Lott, who had some of the same, like some of the pieces, I talked about him with him around that time. And if you scroll down a little bit further, remote work, like basically highly contagious virus, 100. So here's this, wait, go back up a little bit. Sorry. So I thought this helped, the term social distancing wasn't there, and if you go and look at the curves, if another country has an outbreak as bad as China, some trends may be arrested and reversed, at least in the short run. Tinder would fall, perhaps Uber and Airbnb too, digital nomadism as well. And they both like massively crash anything, right? And then if you go down a little bit further, and then I'll just kind of, make one thing. Since you brought this up, go back a little bit. This is the vaccine stuff, which wasn't exactly, the fight wasn't, I didn't actually expect, I didn't get everything right because I didn't expect the multiple flippenings on this. Because at first, the left and right had certain positions. The left was saying it was racist to talk about the coronavirus, and the right was saying China virus and so on. Then they flipped, and then the right was like downplaying it. And then Trump like accelerated the vaccine, and Kamala Harris and others said that they don't trust a Trump vaccine. And then after the election, the vaccine was something that everybody, was supposed to take. And, so it like flipped like 3 or 4
even before
times.
that, if I remember, when you talked about this, by the way, there's an infamous no handshakes allowed blog post, and your reaction to that. But I think when you talked about it, I think there's a sense of racism, that talking about this virus was somehow racist. And do you
I think that was like the Chinese New Year.
There's a call to ban travel from China.
Those people have never apologized, by the way, and they never will, because they're just completely unethical creatures. But
yeah, I mean, there was like the no handshake stuff. There was a Chinese New Year and celebrating it, and having crowds together. There was like a bunch of things. I think for me, like the overall thing is you called it. You called a lot of it. You called like the pandemic when it sounded completely ridiculous. You just went against the tide. You called remote work, face masks, just distrust in just people getting, like, the governments getting their shit together to like get the vaccines out the door. And just, like, every one of these things over the course of like the last 2.5 whatever years, you've basically called it, right? Why?
Uh,
How? Like, how, like, what made you think, oh, this is it, like, this is a pandemic and this is kind of what's going to happen?
Well, so first, a few things. One is, I think I did fairly well, but I definitely didn't get everything right. There's certain, as I mentioned, the flips I didn't get, and I also, the thing I was surprised by, the thing I was most surprised by, honestly, is that the vaccine actually did get out fast.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing I was most surprised, or rather, let me put it like this: if you actually go and look at, here was a part when I was writing, it was during a time of extreme uncertainty, and now in retrospect, the pandemic has quote only killed on the order of, I think 6 or 7 million people worldwide. Perhaps by the time it's done, it will be like on the order of 10 million. Okay?
Wait. I have two questions for you, Balaji. One is on Jan 30th, what did you notice that made you predict this? And the second question is, how did people react, when you told them about this?
Okay. Well, what I noticed, so, what I am, if I have a talent for anything, it is I find exponentials that I bet on early, and whether that's machine learning or genomics or cryptocurrency or remote or like whatever, all my, startup stuff. And the thing is, it's actually hard because some exponentials will peter out and they don't have legs or whatever, right? And this one was something where I was like, I threw the kitchen. So first of all, it wasn't like seeing what was happening in China and how seriously the Chinese government was taking it was a big part of it. The fact that guys like Li Wenliang had died from it, who's healthy 30-year-old, 30 something, was certainly indicative. And fundamentally, it was something where it was an exponential where I couldn't falsify the dynamics that would lead to its continued growth. I wasn't seeing the US establishment taking it seriously. I wasn't seeing people around, like if people around you are on it, remember my thing about how in the comment section, look right, it falls to me.
Nobody's
right?
saying anything. Yeah.
No one's saying anything. By the way, that tweet was also carefully phrased. And if you notice, it opened with, what if, this is one the public health folks have been talking about. Why did I phrase it that way? Because it sort of borrowed the true fact that some members of the establishment had been talking about this and made, one way of thinking about it, by the way, whenever you include a citation, you're bringing reinforcements.
Yeah.
Okay. Citations are reinforcements because you're summoning this person and their army of things. So now it's not like, just you. It's like you and a bunch of this, and you have a bunch of this and this and this. So it's like summoning, things next to you, right? So citations are reinforcements, and this is a heavily cited thread. And actually, if you go down a little bit, this is kind of like what a seed investor is kind of. Go right there. Hold on, stop. That one. Yeah, there you go. That was the status at the time. Click those images there. Yeah. So at the time, there were 8,000 cases, mostly in China, 171 deaths. And if you go to the next one, there only been like, that was mainland China. The rest of the world, it just hadn't broke out yet, right? So it's very early.
But I think this is something very profound, because what you did is you looked at the graph, which is somebody in the tech venture world, it's usually something good, right? Like,
right.
it's not something
It's
good,
up and to the right?
But the exponential nature of it could be something bad, and you extrapolated out and then called it. I remember that month or two, and a lot of people were mad at you, right?
Yeah.
What were they?
Well, they tried. No, they weren't just mad at me. They tried to cancel me and reputation kill me. And in fact, Kara Swisher's Recode, which is like, these outlets don't even really matter anymore, because what's happened is tech has now kind of declared social independence from them, right? That's actually a really key thing. And what I mean by that is, back in, let me talk. Well, okay, I'll talk about that for a second, then come back. Okay.
Yeah.
So when the Puritans went and they migrated from England to the US, or what became the US, rather, North America. They de facto, by changing geographies, they broke social ties. Okay.
Yeah.
And you kind of take that for granted. Normally moving means you break social ties. You've got a new society. Today, though, when you move, by default, you retain social ties. You have to affirmatively break social ties in order to get the kind of social independence a Puritan instead. Therefore, all startup societies should start by doing something like blocknyt.com. Have you seen that site?
Yes.
You want to bring that up for a second? Put that up on the screen for a second.
Anybody who knows you, Balaji, has seen blocknyt.com.
Blocknyt.com, okay, is a site that will basically block hundreds, thousands of NYT journalists and others, right? All of these employees of, this Oxel, Zuckerberg, and everybody knows all the tech founders and so on, and they have an opinion on them. They can recognize Zuckerberg by his face and so on. Nobody knows who Sulzberger is. Do you know, Arti, do you know who Sulzberger is? I haven't talked to you about him.
Well, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So point is, the guy who owns the New York Times is actually like he's inherited the company from his father's 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 father. It is literally this rich white cis white male nepotist who lives in a giant mansion and is the caricature of everything they attack the largely Asian and Indian and Persian and, like meritocratic tech industry for, is this meritless nepotist, right? And
Balaji, I have a question. Have you ever met Sulzberger?
no, but basically,
If you did, what would you say to him?
What I'd say to him is, why do you run billboards calling your private property the truth of the world? And when will you liquidate your corporation to pay reparations to the Ukrainians for denying the Holodomor?
Oh, wow.
Okay. Like literally this guy, I mean, look, people will get canceled or fired for, some random comment. This guy's family fortune was built in part on the compound interest of like genocide denial, right? It's a completely illegitimate organization. And if you read The Gray Lady Winked, for example, and I'm serious about this, it's very important actually. Bring this book up, The Gray Lady Winked. So there's a person, Ashley Rinsberg, who has gone through and just documented how many different crimes. I mean, people talk about disinformation, like you say, okay, Pizzagate, some guy goes and he might shoot up a store or something like that. And one person, may be shot. Literally millions of people have died from their disinformation. It's the Iraq War. It's actually the Vietnam War. David Halberstam printed false information that led to the undermining and of the South Vietnamese government. It's Walter Duranty and the Holodomor, which basically they won a Pulitzer Prize. They've even admitted that it was fake, actually, at the NYT site. If you, there's a bunch of references I have in the book on this, but there's Herbert Matthews, the Cuban Revolution.
Yeah.
He ran interference for Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro was like a Osama bin Laden. He was like on the run, like a defeated terrorist. And he got like a full page profile in the New York Times. And it was like this sympathetic thing that said he's like a hero and he was photographed. And then what happened? Overthrew, Cuba, turned it into a communist hellhole, murdered all these people. And, the New York Times, basically because they rewrite history, because, the saying, the first draft of history, right? What most people haven't realized is some of the most evil people in history are the historians.
By the way, I think the early part of your book, but there's a lot to unpack there. The early part of your book actually has a bunch of examples on this. And I will credit Balaji with, telling me about.
So, you wrote the tweet. I want to come back to this, right?
Go ahead,
Like,
sure.
What were your reactions? I think you mentioned a couple things. Like, what were people like accusing you of? What was
paranoia, exaggeration? You're a racist.
Yeah, I remember the racist one for the Chinese New Year celebration.
Yeah.
And
by the way,
yeah,
the Chinese New Year thing, context on that is in China itself, which is not known for being racist against Chinese people. Okay, like not going that. All right, they had at Wuhan had a whole thing where that like the head of the the mayor or what have you was disciplined for holding Chinese New Year celebrations in the middle of the pandemic.
Right.
And it was something where a bunch of folks had been flying out from there to, SF, because there's tons of traffic back and forth during Chinese New Year. That's a huge thing.
Yep.
And so, like, the thing is that basically the most basic precautions were not taken. It was like, what I realized, the thing is, for a long time, I had wondered whether the US establishment, especially the journos, were stupid or evil, right? Like, with stupid, like, the difference is you can have like a 4-part thing, right? Good is helping others without any concern for yourself. Smart is helping others while also helping yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Stupid is harming others while harming yourself, and evil is harming others while helping yourself. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference is, were they evil and actually lying and they knew that they were lying, or were they just stupid? And with this one, I realized they were stupid, because self-preservation alone should have made them drop the stupid tribalist tech media thing and actually be like, okay, let's figure this out as a society, and is this real, and so on and so forth, right?
So Balaji, I'll say this, obviously for decades to come, there'll be books about COVID, there'll be movies, there'll be, it'll be documented. And I think, and we don't always agree on everything, you and I, but I think you deserve credit for being one of the first to call it, and then bang the drum, make a lot of noise, take a lot of arrows.
But here's the thing. One of the things I said, though, okay, I appreciate that. But the thing is, one of the things I said early on that I just want to make clear, I very much advocated technological solutions, vaccines, drugs, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And with the lockdown stuff in particular, one of the things I said was, this is extraordinarily costly. And if you're doing it, it needs to be very short. And the focus has to be on technologies. You can't have like indefinite lockdown.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is also that, one of the issues here, I'll show you one thread, because I actually thought this is actually even, more important than that. Like, basically, I knew that this would be used by governments to inhibit civil liberties, right? So, because even if it was legitimate, and we didn't know at that time, and I'm going to show you a graph also. So, take a look at this one, which I just put up there, right? So sometimes the solution creates the next problem. My rough forecast of the future, the coronavirus results in quarantines, nationalism, and centralization, and this may actually work to stop the spread. But once under control, states will not cede their power, so we decentralize.
By the way, if there's ever an example of somebody predicting this is it. I mean, the idea of quarantines on February 3rd, 2020 was unthinkable. And here you were, not going to talk about quarantines, but
the second and third order consequences.
Yeah. Can I say something, before we move off this topic? Looking back now, it's been almost actually over 2 years now. Do you wish you had done anything differently in terms of trying to get people's attention to the pandemic?
No, because not really. Here's why. The reason is that what I learned was that the U.S. establishment has no reserve of competence. Mm-hmm. Okay, what I mean by that is, people had this thought before the pandemic that when things got serious, on some floor, there were some like hard-nosed G-men who would just like say, step aside and organize stuff. Like in the movies, like there's some backup plan, like the special, team of the folks in, like the special guys for Transformers or Jason Bourne, guys on some floor who have organizational powers. And, that's from the movies, yet you sort of want to believe that there's somebody who knows what they're doing. Okay. And what I learned from the pandemic is that, it's a bipolar America in both senses of the term, both bipolar in the sense of two poles, blue and red, but also bipolar in the sense of manic depressive, because it only had two modes, which were either A, apathy, or B, panic. Okay? And so when you got attention to it, it was something where first, I remember very clearly someone was like, nothing can be done. We should all die, or basically it's not a big deal. We should just let the coronavirus hit us. Wired published something on that. And then, or the first one was like nothing should be done because nothing will happen, and then nothing can be done, right? But both them were basically just kind of stupid apathy things, and then panic, which is do anything like this, and everybody running around like a chicken with their head cut off, and a bunch of people yelling on Twitter at ever louder volumes and so on. And you realize actually there's no coordination point. There was no there's simply no order. It was as if you dropped a bad financial report in the team Slack and then just told everybody to just yell and freak out or whatever, right? And that's not going to get you something good. One way of thinking about it is if there's a house, okay, and you tell 1,000 people to go and burn down like a house, 100 people, whatever, they can do it. Why? Because they don't need to coordinate. Destruction paralyzes. One guy has a brick, one guy has this. They don't need to coordinate at all. Destruction is embarrassingly parallel. If you have those 100 people, you tell them to go build a house. That's really hard, right? They need skills. You need to have the contract, the cement laid in this order and the electricity, the electrical wiring and so on. Building does not embarrassingly paralyze. Doing something constructive is actually difficult. This is why in the network state concept, the capacity for collective action of this online community is highly non-trivial.
Yeah.
Yep.
Being able to do, right? So the problem is getting attention to something does not result in solving the problem. It just resulted in all these people panicking or whatever, right? So I don't, that's the thing.
I think what we should have done, Balaji, is at the time, you should have been running the CDC or the FDA.
It doesn't even matter. So that's the thing is, the Kobayashi Maru situation is?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Look,
Yeah.
I'm
No
look,
win.
OG trekker right here. Come on.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, the Kobayashi Maru, actually, why don't you tell them what it is?
Well, the Kobayashi Maru is a test taken by one James T. Kirk when he was at Starfleet Academy. It's actually never shown on screen, by the way. In the original series, only talked about, but actually then they show it on screen in the recent movies. And the test is actually you run a simulation. You're a student, and you are in essentially this no-win situation where a bunch of Klingon ships show up, and you're supposed to realize it's no-win. Except our Captain James T. Kirk winds up actually hacking the simulation, I think the night before, and actually passing the test, right? And there's kind of this debate about whether it's okay or not okay. It's kind of one of the classic.
I didn't know that part. Okay, so fine. Supposedly, it's supposed to be, though, a no-win situation. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the thing about this is there's a presumption in when you say, oh, running the CDC or this or that. It's like basically being put in a car that, you're going vroom, vroom like a little kid, but the wheels aren't on the ground. Like for many purposes, I don't think people realize this yet. For many purposes, the US government does not exist. In the sense,
what do you mean?
What do you mean?
Meaning like the CDC doesn't control disease. The FDA does not approve tests. The IRS can barely even send checks. Like in San Francisco, the $300 million bus lane takes like 20 years. You're having rapidly declining state capacity that is symbolized by radically increasing cost and time to do basic things.
Yeah.
And what that ends up in is it's like maintenance gets more and more and more expensive, and then it's not even done. And then you have, feces on the street and fentanyl and this and that. And you have something where like this is if you want a projection, that's why I think the future is American anarchy. Like the US government doesn't exist in the sense that people think it does. It's like a Soviet bureaucracy, which basically it doesn't have basic competence. It has people who have titles and they prance around like actors, but they don't have the. Go ahead.
I want to move on because we have some. But
sure,
I would argue that a lot of other countries who have even more state capacity than you would argue the US does did not handle code also.
Oh yeah, sure. So well, that's the thing is this is a Kobayashi Maru. Let me show you something. Actually, if you go to COVID deaths and you just do worldwide all, so go to Google, type in COVID deaths, do worldwide and all.
Okay, so we are at 10.4 million.
Yeah, but no, do all. Not United States. Do worldwide.
Okay, got it. Worldwide. All right.
And then do all time. Okay, wait. So hold on. So take a look at that. So that initial ramp, okay, is going like, so that time, when if you track the curve forward, that exponential up to right about there, maybe plus minus 30, that is basically when I was tweeting about COVID the most. Why? Because I was tracking the numbers. And it was an empirical question and a very non-obvious question as to whether that would top out at 6,000 deaths per day or 60,000 deaths per day.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? That is an empirical question, which I didn't know, but I did know that it was going to be nasty, right?
Yeah.
We're very fortunate as literally an empirical question, whether that, was 6,000 rather than 60,000, which a few more weeks of compounding could have gotten there. Okay. Which was like the Spanish flu or something else. Right. And here's my, wait, let me just say one thing. I actually need to go and look at the science on this. And this is a mental model, which I actually haven't looked at the literature, but my one guess of something I want to look at. So I want to just qualify what I'm about to say is that if you assume that susceptibility and severity are correlated, meaning those people, imagine that you have to have, you might get the virus on the first exposure, or you might get it on the second, or you might get it on the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, right? So Li Wenliang, perhaps he got it on the first exposure, and then somebody who only got COVID in March got it on the second or the third, right? You have to, because it's like you have a lucky break, you miss it, you get exposed, but you don't get it until, right? If you have something where those people who are highly susceptible also have the highest severity,
right,
then those who are hit by the virus early on disproportionately are those who just had a bad roll of the dice for their HLA antigens, for their immune, their immune repertoire. It's like not like being naturally immune, it's like naturally susceptible, right? If we, and I have to look at the literature on this to test this, I might be wrong, but that hypothesis would explain why, maybe fatality rates were higher early on and you had folks in their 30s dying, and then they dropped off because it kind of just did this huge global search for those people who are the most susceptible, killed them. And then, the combination of eventually vaccines, and then also like, maybe more awareness or what have you, reduced it.
Right.
Now, with that said, it's still like, it's a 6 million person death event. But I think the thing is, state capacity doesn't solve this. That's what we now know. What really, not in the normal sense, what solves it is technological capacity, better vaccines, and so on. The state capacity matters insofar as it drives the technology. It's fundamentally a technological battle. Now, with that said, with a better government, we would have had, millions or billions of people with personal genomes today. We would have had millions or billions of people with quantified self-monitoring. And why would that have been important? Well, guess what? We have massive disease heterogeneity with something like COVID. Okay. And some people have really bad outcomes, and some have really, like it's just a cold and whatnot, especially early on. It's very hard to figure out what was going on. And people were trying to do these very aggregate national level correlations. Oh, it's bad in Sweden and it's good here or whatever, right? And actually what you want, if you think about it from a stats perspective, that's a roll up of a table where you've got one categorical column that is country, and you're trying to do like, aggregations and compare them. You can run into Simpson's paradox and other kinds of things when doing that, where the composition actually inverts the underlying correlations. Anyway, point is, what you actually wanted to do, among other things, is have individual people with their own genomes and their own conditions being able to see whether there were variants that made them more or less susceptible or at higher or lower severity, just in the same way that like warfarin dosing, for example, VKRC1, CYP2A9, those affect your warfarin dose, okay? So point being that the state capacity lack was not the coercive state capacity of didn't lock down hard enough and so on. It was it was a cake that was baked years ago. It's like Bezos says, today's quarter was baked like years ago, right? The lack of state capacity then was because state had not allowed technological capacity, had not allowed societal capacity, had not allowed billions of genomes to be sequenced so we could figure out heterogeneity, didn't allow everyone to have health monitoring devices so we could figure out who was getting sick and track the virus across things. All that type of stuff was held back by the FDA in the US. And then the question is, why was that also held back in China? Well, China in some ways can innovate, but really much of their innovation, not all, much of their innovation is fork the root and then do it better. Like WeChat, like sort of forks the root. They've got now a Chinese root administrator, system administrator, then they do it better. But the fundamental moral innovation, something like FDA bad,
Yep.
is not what they specialize in.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
right there, in many ways, they're like both Buddhism and communism are like imported social OSs.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. By the way, that graph is so grim, and hope we'll never see the likes of it in the rest of our lifetime. Okay, so Balaji, I'm going to take this in a different direction.
Please.
I'm going to give you a couple of names of people, and I think some of these people share opinions with you. Some of them, don't share opinions. I'm kind of curious to get your take on their philosophy. And the first person I'm thinking about, especially when you talk about transhumanism, and when you think about, is actually Elon, because Elon has talked a lot about expanding state of consciousness. He's obviously building companies that are very relevant to this. You mentioned more than one. So when you think about Elon, where do you find yourself agreeing? What do you think of his body of work?
Well, I respect Elon for SpaceX and for Tesla. I mean, and obviously Neuralink, boring company. He's unparalleled as an entrepreneur. I think obviously this recent Twitter thing probably could have gone better for all parties. I don't know what the final outcome of that is going to be, but it's messy. But net, he's made enormous contribution to humanity. He's restarted space travel. That alone is worth everything else. Like SpaceX to me is much more important than Tesla. I mean, Tesla is important, but SpaceX is really important. And Neuralink is important also, brain-machine interface and, that kind of stuff. All of this stuff is important. It's like, basically, it's like a 10, a 9, and an 8 or something like that. Most people aren't even at a 1 or whatever. So
what do you think of Elon's, I think one of the things Elon talks a lot about is how he worries about the population. It's actually interesting. That phrase now is very different than that meaning of the phrase maybe 30 years ago.
Even like 15.
And less population rather than more. Yeah.
And and do you worry about population collapse? Do you worry about us just running out of should we all be having more kids? Like, what is your take on this kind of that arc of the human population?
So this is complicated, multifactorial, and so on. Well, first is I do think robotics over demographics, in the sense that 12 people did Instagram and they beat the 12,000 at Kodak, and that quality over quantity is important in that sense. Like, basically just raw numbers won't necessarily win, right? With that said, I think it is good that Elon, even if I wouldn't necessarily advise people to emulate having 9 children by 3 different women and so on, or whatever the number is, I don't know the exact count at this point. Even if that may not be having lots of children is actually, I think, good for a number of reasons, but it basically means you have a stake in the future. And obviously everyone will argue about this and so on and so forth. But let's say startup societies that have the one commandment of, children good are, I think, going to be good ones. Whereas the ones that are like degrowth and say, oh my God, don't have kids because of climate or whatever, are like, they're like the Shakers. Do you know the Shakers?
No.
That's a great example. The Quakers, but you probably not heard of the Shakers. The Shakers were, let me see if I can find the link. One of these American societies that like various religious innovations, which were like religious fundamentalists that believed in never having intercourse or anything like that, and so they died out. Right? Duh. And so essentially, did not marry or bear children, right? So they did have, influence, cultural influence, but fundamentally, there was like natural selection against them themselves,
Right.
And so, I mean, basically, if you don't have those groups that have children are those that are going to inherit the future and not, vice versa, right? So one, robotics or demographics, because I disagree with the idea that just sheer numbers are everything. But number 2 is I do think, if you have the capacity for it and the inclination for it, it's probably a good idea. Right. And then number 3 is I also do think that we can do a lot to make it easier for women and for families and so on from, for example, one concept for a startup society would be something like communal childcare or round robin childcare is good.
Which is
So
sort of very similar to how a lot of like, at least growing up in India, you know, how a lot of like Eastern culture, especially Indian culture, used to be kind of these big joint
Mhm.
families.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you know,
but like the round robin system
yeah.
of like, just having being able to like not assign one particular person as a caretaker.
Yeah, exactly. So you have something where it's like, I don't know, just a toy example, the numbers might not work out, but you have 15 families, and you've got 30 parents, and each one takes 1 day a month, and they're watching all the kids in this sort of central playground kind of thing. And you have a compound or circle or something like that together. And then, parents can come and just drop off the kids and go and do something with an uncle that they trust or an auntie that they trust. And now it's something where, the cost of childcare otherwise is like eye-watering, and it pins, women down. It's a disincentive for child. It's like just one of many things, right? But that's like, one focused innovation, right? Where men and women can contribute on raising their children, on building a community together, and so on. And it's kind of like the homeschooling pods is sort of, one piece of this. And so the point about this, by the way, is like, you get out of the domain of just quote tech innovation into societal innovation, but you're not doing it from the stupid, in my view, counterproductive policy lens, right? The reason is people talk about democracy and capitalism a lot, and they have their merits, but they're fundamentally both conflict resolution mechanisms.
Right. Right.
Because democracy is you've got some scarce resources, you have a vote on it, and capitalism is you have a scarce resource and you have a market on it, right? And they're good, but they're conflict resolution mechanisms. And often what you want is, within a society, within a company, within a community, you're not auctioning everything or having a vote on everything. You're having sort of trusted allocation, which actually is smoother flowing. It's kind of, markets and democracy are for between, like outside of domain or membrane boundaries, right? So you can increase a membrane boundary from the individual or the small, couple to a larger group.
Larger
I think
group.
you can get very far with that.
By the way, I just have to say, I'm picturing the startup community, and one day it's Balaji's turn to watch all the kids, and there's a bunch of 4-year-olds who's like, well, this uncle just pulled up Wikipedia on his laptop and showed us who Walter Duranty is.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's actually very important. Very early on, all children should know who Walter Duranty is.
You joke, but
you joke, but it's happening. Okay, next question. AGI and AI, right? So, in the last, say, 6 months, we have seen everything from DALL-E 2 to this Google engineer who believed that
that was stupid. Yeah.
Yes, well, it's interesting, but I guess the question for you would be, what do you think is the arc of AI, and should we ever need to worry about AGI in some shape or form?
So I am generally an AGI bull. So this is a complicated topic. Let me see if I can, So first of all, artificial special intelligence as opposed to general intelligence, I don't think anyone is really questioning that now, because it's there's this great cartoon that Kurzweil had in his book that I think Elon actually tweeted a while ago, which shows a guy scribbling something like, computers will never compose a sonnet. Okay, X. Computers will never win a game of chess, X, and he's like throwing these out. He's like furiously trying to find something that humans can still do that computers cannot do, right? Because computers keep progressing. And the thing is that if you talk about special intelligence, right, as opposed to general intelligence, the ability to draw a drawing, make a painting, translate something, summarize something, do sentence completion or, what have you, it's getting really good, right? And we're also seeing that GPT-3 is a real breakthrough because it's sort of turning language itself into a programming language. Like pretty much anything can, so using GPT-3, you can have it be like upstream or something like it, upstream of an image generator, and upstream of a code generator, and upstream of this. So anything we can describe with human language is something that we can now code, right? So you could probably have it code video game strategies and so on in a very compact way. You can have it, if it's got enough examples and mappings and knows the vocabulary, that like the power of language is actually being the bus for all of this stuff is like a new thing. And I feel that that's like only really obvious over the last couple of years with really large language models, and I don't think it was obvious before then. Gwern has actually a good review of this he had a long Reddit thread on kind of LLMs and the state of LLMs, which is worth reading. So artificial special intelligence, I don't think is really in doubt. Any particular area, usually people will say, yeah, I can imagine how you build an AI for that.
Right.
You
What about the AGI side of things?
So one of the issues here is, the Turing test is actually almost obsolete, and not obsolete now, but basically the Turing test is being passed for many definitions of passed because you can have very realistic chatbots that can fool a large number of humans much of the time. I do think that what is still a frontier would be what I might call the multiplayer Turing test, where you have a bunch of AIs talking to each other, and then you have a human looking down on them and saying, is this a realistic conversation or interaction? Okay.
Right.
And basically, because that, like, could you have a bunch of AIs and they generate a Slack, or they generate something that looks very like a group of humans interacting, but they're actually all droids, underneath, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's one possibility.
Yep.
But community behavior is still not there. The reason is, if you really could get that, then you could start making economics and history into empirical sciences. Why? So this is actually in the book, but basically, it's saying past performance doesn't predict future results.
Yeah.
Right. So in physics, it does. Right?
Sure.
Because you have time invariant systems.
Right.
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 The laws of physics, basically do not change over time.
Over time. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's certain kinds of media, like in the sense of physical media, that have memory of some kind, or
some sort of like deterioration over
hysteresis.
time. Yeah.
Hysteresis or stuff like that, right? Mechanical, stress or things like that. But to first order, like Maxwell's equations aren't time varying, right?
Mhm.
Or rather, the equations themselves do not change over time. And so whereas with so what that means is you can rerun an experiment. You can go and put a projectile back on the launch pad and hit the thing. And if you reset the initial conditions, it'll fly the same way, assuming the wind isn't there. And so the initial conditions are the same.
Sure. Yeah.
The device will boot up at the same time. Okay. Whereas if you run the same trading algorithm in the market, it'll eventually adapt and you won't make a profit anymore. It is because there are humans on the other side, and it's not a time invariant system, that past performance doesn't predict future results in finance. And that's why all the financial time series analysis and so on is actually quite distinct from, let's say, the time series analysis you'd apply to, mechanical engineering. If like a car's juddering up and down, you can reset the car and repeat the experiment. The financial stuff, you only have one shot. Okay, what's my point? Point is that even despite this, there's certain somewhat predictable things you can get out of microeconomics. You can get supply and demand. You can get, certain kinds of utility curves or whatever. Auctions and stuff work a certain way, in a predictable way. Human behavior is somewhat predictable in certain games, in the same way you can sort of predict that a pitcher will throw a pitch and a batter will swing at it. I think a frontier would be if you can start having AIs trading crypto, and you start being able to like reproduce certain human behaviors. So now you have not just one path through, but it's like, okay, given these initial conditions, we get these outcomes, right?
Yep.
So eventually my point is that you could start doing something where you start making at least microeconomics a testable science. You could simulate out, if you could have the multiplayer Turing test and a bunch of bots actually generating human-like behaviors, they could live 1,000 years in a minute or 10 years in a minute.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you could have a society of hundreds of thousands of people actually doing an economy and trading back and forth and seeing what would happen. That is as far ahead of where we are today, I think, as Turing's test was from where he was, right?
Yeah.
But I do think of that as a frontier, as like simulated societies as opposed to simulated people, because then it's not chat bots, but it's like emergent actions and stuff like that would actually give us information.
I love
that's a parallel realities too. Parallel realities. Go ahead.
I love it, and I grew up, like, for example, reading like Michael Crichton's Swarm, which deals with agent-based systems, and we have companies like Improbable which do that. Okay, again, we spent over 2.5 hours, and you're full of ideas across probably a dozen disciplines at this point, and I guess what is your secret of A, studying across disciplines, and B, to productivity? So maybe let's just start with, how are you productive? What are your tips and tricks to learn? What do you do all day?
Well, okay, so what do I do? I mean, I have no desire to do anything other than work and study. So, like, a normal person wants to go to the club, or
What?
so I'll
Hold on.
go ahead.
It's like you're like this sentient AI who's just making things up about like what other people do.
Your reference, okay. There's maybe a set of
Going to
people
the
who want to go to
discotheque.
the discotheque, as Liz Lemon would say from 30 Rock. But yes, I don't think that's what normal people generally want to do. But point taken.
There's a subset of people who will, oh, I want to go to Tahoe. Oh, I want to go to the club. Oh, I want to go on a vacation
To Miami.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, right? And look, that's all great. I'm very happy for them. This is good. But for the
But
most,
this is why they'll never do anything useful in their lives.
I didn't say that. Some of them are actually like,
I'm saying it, not
yeah.
that.
Well, there's a different kind of personality. Okay, a different kind of personality is the COO personality,
Okay.
right? So there's the CTO and the COO. Like those are two different kinds of CEOs or two different kinds of founders, right? Ben calls them ones and twos. I call them like the COO CEO and the CTO CEO.
Okay.
And the difference is that the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer type CEO, is like a Zuck or a Larry Page or a Drew Houston, fundamentally a technologist, fundamentally like one with the machine, figures out something new and, is pushing it forward and is like okay at management, but their passion is really for like, the magic, right? And or can grow to become okay at management.
Mm-hmm.
The COO CEO, the Chief Operating Officer CEO, is more of the CEO from central casting. They're the 1 to N rather than 0 to 1 type CEO, and they love process and they love to keep things humming. And there's a big difference, which is the CTO type is usually a night person and the COO type is usually a morning person. The COO type is usually like religious about exercise. Like, Keith Raboy is like that, Tim Cook, right? Travis Kalanick. These are amazing operational, executives who just the number of operations per second, that like just sheer level of energy they have to just turn the crank and get 3 days worth of work done in one day. And just the boundless energy and multiprocessing is there. But they're not as naturally drawn to heads down rumination, 0 to 1 type stuff, right? So the COO CEO, the chief, that type can schedule a vacation. In fact, they love doing that stuff. They love scheduling everything. Scheduling is what they live for. They schedule shit, right? And the
I just like we're getting the Balaji model of humanity, right? Which I just
Right.
love this.
Basically,
Of course, there's people who
be a CTO
And go to the club.
and go to the club.
Yeah, the chief operating officer, is a kind of person who can basically they can schedule vacation, which people are like, of course you're going to schedule a vacation. But to me, it's like, how can I like schedule relaxation? Those seem like almost antithetical concepts. Like, oh, I'm going to go and like go down this checklist of, passport this and blah, blah, all this, like it's like invading a country. You've got this checklist of all this stuff. You have to, MREs and, and you have to do all this stuff in order to take this complicated.
You are talking about boarding an airplane and going to another place, right? Like,
so
what
I'm talking about is like a scheduled vacation. Like you're going and I'm going to go to this tourist destination. I'm going to go to this tourist, like scheduling stuff is work, right? That's what I mean.
Yeah.
There's a certain kind of, like if you've heard the term, like, gosh, I'm not sure they have it. It's not in France anymore, but it's a certain kind of tourist who must see every single spot and they check it off and they're like, boom, take a photo and they're in front of it and it's like next. And the thing is, I somewhat joke about this, but Instagram is for people who go outside. Okay. And Twitter is for intellectuals, quote unquote, right? And meaning basically, lazy people, verbal people, whatever, right? Anyway, so what I do answer is I do work out. I work out. I work. I do go outside, but I go outside to work out or whatever, swim or run or something. And I'll sometimes do sun and steel. I've got like my weights and stuff, and I'll just go out there and reduce the property values by clanking the weights, and bystanders look at it like, oh, it's, right. And
wait, sun and steel.
Sun and steel.
Could you explain that?
Sun and steel. So there's this guy named Bap online who tweets a lot about sun and steel. I disagree with a lot of stuff he writes.
For the 10th time, this video is not going to stay up on YouTube.
Yeah. So BAP, I'm not going to expand the acronym, but you can find it. So some of BAP stuff is funny. Some of it is not. Some of it's funny. Some of it I agree with. Some of it I disagree with. But one thing I do agree with is the lifting weights, being outside is good, right? Like seeing the sun, and it's actually kind of hard to do that, by the way. To do sun and steel, to actually like be outside lifting weights, you kind of have to set that up because you have to like move the weights outside, and you kind of have to either have a garage or some kind of thing. You have to like consciously do that. It's not like a trivial thing to do, but lifting weights outside, I strongly recommend it because it's just kind of awesome, and it's a good workout and whatnot. Anyway. So,
but I have to say another timeline. Balaji is a fitness influencer, right?
You will never believe it, okay? But in the 2000s, I was super freaking jacked. I was as jacked as a South Asian can be, given our genetic constraints.
How can you say jacked and Tair Sadam?
Is there a photo of this on the internet anywhere?
Not on the internet. But someday I'll show you if you want. Whatever. Because the thing is, whatever I do, I do it to like an insane level, And so all the bro science type stuff or whatever, I just kind of like, you get up, and if our ancestors would do yoga or something like that, I would just like, run and lift. I think
they just like prayed in temples all day. I think that's all they did.
But it's the same kind of thing. You do the yoga, you do the physical type of thing. Point is that, so work out, work, read. And what's my recreation is, I don't know, like a Princeton Companion to Mathematics or Shams outlines, Shams, right? Yeah.
I have not heard somebody say Shams in so long. Like, what?
Yeah, for the technical people watching this, you probably know Shams outlines. But if you don't know Shams outlines, get Shams outlines and just do problems. Don't listen to the teacher first. Maybe not ever, but if you need to, just do problems out of Shams, and you'll just very quickly like placement test yourself and figure out how good you are in a given topic. Like I would give like Shams, on X or Y or Z to somebody who's an executive that I needed, to level up in a certain area. And I'd be like, okay, here's on X day, maybe even talking 2 days or 3 days.
Oh my goodness. On the topic of working out,
is it bringing you exam PTSD?
Yeah, I was not good at that. On the topic of maybe working out and maybe just overall like health, what do you think of? I know you mentioned Andrew Huberman. What do you think of his content, his protocols? What protocols do you wind up following, and just how do you think about fitness, healthy overall wellness?
Well, I'm like down like, I don't know, 30 something pounds or whatever since I was extreme fat. So, 3 years ago or so. But how do I think about it? I mean, basically, I feel we are just so underinvested in health as like a civilization and society. That's actually one of the few silver linings out of COVID is I feel people have become more health conscious as a function of that, and insofar as you get like a V-shaped recovery where you were taking one path economically, in the tech tree, and now you're exploring another path in the tech tree. I think much more investment in quantified self and life extension. For example, I've talked about this before. I talked about this 10 years ago, but I do actually think fitness is the backdoor to medicine. And the reason is that medicine as construed in the US and, through the US, because it's got, you know what harmonization is?
No. In what context?
harmonization in the context of regulation is the way that unelected American bureaucrats rule the world. Meaning the FDA, just like, for example, you've got a small website and they outsource their login to Facebook. You have a small country and it outsources its regulation to FDA or SEC or CFTC or all of them, which means that these guys you've never heard of, who you've never had, they're not elected and can't be fired in some basement in Silver Spring, Maryland, have a veto on worldwide biomedical everything. There's never been an election. I don't think you've ever seen an election run on CDRH's policy, right? Or even, nobody even knows what they are. So
but it is actually true in the internet. I was just chatting with somebody about this with the EU and say privacy laws. So if you look at something like say GDPR and why when you travel to Europe you click on cookies anywhere, it came out of the EU and then it kind of became a thing globally. And it's kind of the same phenomenon. It's not in medicine, but you basically have a bureaucracy set some policies, and then every agency around the world winds up adopting it.
That.
Yeah, and, it's funny. I saw the EU is trying to regulate. I mean, they had this ridiculous thing. I forgot who posted about it, but they're like, "Yeah, okay, the US and China are doing all this AI. We're behind, but you know what we're going to be a leader in? The regulation of AI." Okay,
God.
and they literally have something which I tweeted about, which is like, the use of logical or other statements. I'm like, they're literally trying to regulate if-then statements and logic under the grounds of
yes,
they're trying to
regulating AI.
regulate Turing test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I want to kind of bring it
yeah.
back to Huberman and neuroscience and wellness, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I like Andrew Huberman. I think that transhumanism, what Huberman is doing, what Sinclair is doing, and so on. This is along with network states and startup societies. This is next, right? Like crypto, like I'm all about. Think about how much I talked to you about Bitcoin 10 years ago, right? Like, and that was 10 years ago when the price was in double digits, right? And go ahead.
I should have bought some Bitcoin then, but did not.
It's just this second reminder this episode.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah.
What did you do with that? All the
What did you do exactly,
information.
Arthi? But basically, if you think of it as startup, tech companies, then crypto protocols, startup cities, network states.
Yeah.
And then, human 2.0, transhumanism, right? Optimalism. Why? Because network states enable that. Network states allow people to have medical sovereignty, your body, your choice, consensually upgrading themselves, regardless of what others say. If they are, if they're consenting adults, they should basically be able to do it if they're not harming others. At least that's a guiding principle of this. Other people will disagree with that or whatever, and they'll have various objections. But I think that if we can carve out those jurisdictions, we will see like 50 years of medical progress in like 2 years. Okay. Like all of this pent up, the entire genomics revolution. To give you just a proof of that. Okay. I'm going to show you two things. Irum's law. Okay. Are you familiar with that?
No, what?
Okay. So Moore's law.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Have you ever heard of Irum's law?
No.
Okay. Irum's law it's also in the book. It's Moore's law backward. Okay. So here, put this on screen.
Those kids are getting an education from Uncle Balaji at the park, right?
Yes, they are.
All right.
Okay. So scroll down a little bit further. Yeah. So basically, there we go. So essentially what FDA has managed to do, and by the way, at the FDA, they delete THE. So they just call themselves FDA as opposed to the FDA. So FDA has managed to, in a period of what we think of as huge technological innovation, at least in computers, increase the price of drug development like 100x. Okay. Something's weird here, right? Is it, all the good drugs have, not been found? Now, recently this has started to some kind of trends can only go so far and then they have to reverse or whatever. Recently, this seems to have flattened out a little bit. Like there's a possibility of a break here because FDA, one thing again, it's hard to remember this, but just like 2 years ago, it was very, aberrant or not aberrant. it's very unpopular to talk about the COVID stuff when I did.
Mhm.
Okay. It's hard to remember now how taboo it was to criticize regulations in 2010.
Right.
Okay. In some ways, we've actually significantly liberalized where that is very much within the domain of conversation because, what happened was the regulators basically and the establishment won a Pyrrhic victory over Uber. Okay. They managed to, get Travis, they managed to decapitate the company and get Travis out and, basically stir up this whole hate thing. But ride sharing still exists. Airbnb still exists, right?
Right.
Uber is there, Grab is there, Didi is there. They're trying to kind of jam it into the garage and mess up the pricing, but the concept is there. And whether it's self-driving cars or something, it's basically not going to go away. Like it'll be there in some form, right? Probably. And so here's the second graph. Okay, so this is the cost per human genome, and so this has declined by several orders of magnitude. So drug development cost has increased, but the cost per human genome has declined. So the basic science has dramatically improved, but the regulatory cost has increased. And so it's this enormous, it's like this rubber band. It's just like the thing with San Francisco. Did you see, you want another kind of thing? Do you see my tweet on San Francisco in 2019?
Which one?
Oh, this is actually a good one, right? So this in 2019, right before the
You're talking about the 20-year train thing, right?
The 20-year train. What do you mean?
The 20 years to work on the station.
That one is important also, but basically here,
Balaji
take
a
a
lot
look
of
at.
tweets on San Francisco.
I know. That's why I was like, which one?
That is an important one also, but take a look at this one. Ready? So take a look at this one, and then also Paul PG's response. Okay. I think PG and I were both right about this, but whatever.
PG, of course, for everyone, is Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator. Here we go.
Yeah, so scroll up a little bit. I was arguing a little bit, with Elad Gil, who's a great guy, smart guy. And this is pre-pandemic and, whatever. But he was essentially arguing that SF was going to be around to stay and so on, right? And I said, San Francisco has 30,000 car break-ins a year. The streets are filthy and a health hazard. It's extraordinarily expensive. Yet feces and prices rise in tandem.
Yeah.
This is a bubble this is just like my thing about if Room's law going like this and the genomics going like that, the competing, you can't have both the, feces and prices rise in tandem. This is a bubble which will burst when the right alternative finally appears, like taxi medallions. And when I say they rise in tandem, you saw the poop graph, right? Like
poop
graph. It's literally an exponential. I'm not saying like an exponential, like, oh, it's a casual thing. I mean, here, just for those who don't know, it is definitely true that there's parts of India that are much, much cleaner than San Francisco. Just put up this.
Do we really need to show this? Okay, fine, we can show this.
Just a graph, right? So it's literally an exponential, okay? So, or at least it's definitely up dramatically, okay? 10x and, or 5x in a few years. If you go back one page. Back, yeah, okay. So scrolling up, yeah, so basically the bubble which will burst when the right alternative finally appears, like tax medallions, and then you go down, and I said it's a terrible product with great legacy distribution. When the true alternative finally arrives, exit will be rapid.
Yeah,
and that was before the emergence of, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I said, I remember this one from 2019. I remember it.
In some ways, I think the COVID exodus might be a part of it.
So now here's what's interesting. Here's Paul Graham's remark, and what's funny is these were thesis and antithesis, and the synthesis, I think we both sort of proved right. Historically been common when they decline, it's always due to some external force, e.g. the whole country does, not simply an alternative appearing, right?
I think in some ways, I think another way to think about this from PG is that SF and tech are Lindy, right? And the presence of Stanford, it's kind of like Hollywood and movies or finance and Wall Street or so on and so forth, that there is this Lindy nature to it, which makes it hard to exit from. Okay. All right.
Well, I'll say one thing, because SF is actually, as a tech capital, is actually very new. It only really started in 2008.
Yes, it's really the Bay Area, right? And Stanford.
The Bay Area. The Bay Area has been around for a while, but I guess here's my point is, I was bringing that up because it's a rubber band snap, right?
Yeah.
You had something which, on the one hand, you had all of these, tech companies that were in SF and had made all these huge investments there. And then you had the city just getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yet the tech companies also kept increasing in value. And so they were able to like get all this money from the cloud to subsidize these insane class of what I call political billionaires. You know what
Yeah.
a political billionaire is?
No.
A political is somebody who controls $1 billion political budget.
Oh,
Right?
Okay.
gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
So
got it.
all of those, and actually they're much richer than billionaires. Why? Because
They have power.
San Francisco's $13 billion budget that is just literally thrown in
Yeah.
the gutter, right?
Mhm.
That $13 billion budget that pays the entire homeless industrial complex and all these do nothing people. That, you have like these roughly, I think there's like on the order of 10 supervisors, we've got the exact number, I think it's 12 supervisors, something, and a
Yep.
mayor. And so you can consider them political billionaires, which have about $1 billion that they incinerate each year. And it's actually even worse than a normal billionaire. I mean, a normal billionaire has $1 billion lifetime, and that's illiquid net worth.
Yeah.
This is $1 billion in cash that these people are incinerating.
By the way, we're doing a live stream of this, and one of the people in the chat earlier was actually Gary Tan, who's actually been doing a lot of great work
Oh,
in
yeah.
Yes.
trying to reform SA. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, which I know you guard, your privacy pretty deeply. If you had to name 3 cities that you think people should choose to live in across the world in some order, which 3 cities would you pick and why?
For what purpose?
Anything. Quality of life, access to opportunity, access to amazing people.
Did we lose Balaji?
I think Balaji's thinking and he's off. It's interesting because I think one of the interesting questions is, I think a lot of people think about is Balaji back. Okay, 3 cities.
Yeah, go ahead. You said quality of life, et cetera, et cetera. Go ahead.
Access to opportunity, access to people you want to live with. Could be anything. Pick your optimization algorithm.
It's a good question. Well, Henley Global is, a site that, studies like migration of high net worth and whatnot. And that's only one indicator, of course.
Mhm.
But an interesting thing is all the big countries are losing, their millionaires and billionaires and what have you, right? So obviously Russia, but China, and actually India is generating them almost as quick as it's losing them, something like that. And the US has actually, it used to be a net destination for millionaires, billionaires, but it's actually dropped 86% over the last 3 years since the pandemic, from like net 10,000 something coming in per year to like 1,000 something. And it'll probably turn negative soon. And so that's an interesting point, which is, wait a second, if all the big guys are losing, who's gaining? And it's places like the UAE, like Switzerland, like Monaco, Singapore, actually Israel is a big gainer. Okay. And these small jurisdictions, I think, are generally, if the 20th century was the Geiger states, the 21st is in part about the small states and the network states. And actually, you could have a neo-Hanseatic League. Do you know what the Hanseatic League was? It was like a group of city-states that allied together for common defense against like marauders and pirates and so on.
Gotcha.
So you could have a network Hanseatic League, where you have a bunch of, smaller principalities that align together non-geographically, because the internet means they're much more connected than normal. They can align for the purpose of trade and communication. Normally, all these sort of pacts and stuff are geographical. But people living more and more on the internet, they've shared metaverse kind of things. They can be non-geographical to a great extent. Okay, so I guess those small countries would be, I think, where you'd go if it's just generic, like where I think best generic quality of life is.
Mm-hmm.
But it very much depends on what you want to do, because I think increasingly we're seeing more and more regulatory variation. So if you want to do stem cells, well, Germany had more liberal laws. If you want to do nuclear power, well, Wyoming has liberalized there. If you want to do Bitcoin, then maybe El Salvador, and so on and so forth, right? Like drones, I believe Nebraska, and I think even Brazil has liberal drone laws. And so the point is that and this is actually an article that Mark Anderson and I discussed, and he actually has something on this from several years ago around the same time, which is turn Detroit into Drone Valley in Politico, right? It's basically this concept of, at the time I was tweeting about special innovation zones. So this kind of came out of some of that, I think.
Oh, yeah,
and,
I remember that.
you remember
Okay,
that, right? Yeah.
listen, there's a good list out there. Okay, Last question for the day.
Please.
It's been an amazing few hours. Lex Friedman likes to ask, what is the meaning of life? You accomplished so much, in a relatively short period of time. And if you are, say, 50, 60 years from now, maybe before being uploaded to the singularity consciousness in some kind, and you were looking back, and you were like, well, this gave my life meaning, this gave my life purpose. What do you think that would have to be? What would you have to have accomplished? What would you want to have done? What would make you go like, this was good?
That was a pretty decent life.
Yeah. Before you become part of the singularity.
Good question. I think getting the first network state going would be pretty big, but I actually think that that's just the lead up to getting Human 2.0 going. And yeah. So there's a Tesla and then there's a SpaceX or whatever. if we can make it happen, obviously it's different in many ways,
The 10, 10, 9, and 8.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, look, obviously we'll see, getting the first network state. I mean, it's funny just thinking about that, by the way, just talk 1 second about that. One of the reasons I gave away the book is, I don't care about sales. It's nice to have sales. Don't get me wrong. It's whatever's good. And people can buy if they want to read it offline. But the reason it's at the networkstate.com and all the stuff is being pushed there is the metric in 10 years is not 1 million sales, but 1 network state.
There you go.
And so that's, I think, that'll be pretty big if we can make that happen.
Yeah.
If you're going to create a Sun and Steel network state, Sriram should be a part of that.
Well,
he'll be so jacked. He's already tall. So then he'll be like,
on that note,
leading man. There you go.
On that note, Balaji, you're probably one of the most interesting people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing and calling my friend. And this was amazing. And if humanity ever figures out network state and if humanity ever figures out how to make it through 2.0, I think you'd be a key part of it. So thank you so much. The book, the site is up there. We'll have it in the links. Go check it out. Go share it. Go spread the word. And yeah, this was amazing.
This video
awesome.
might not be on YouTube for long, so watch it when you can.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
But thank you so much, Balaji.
Awesome. Thanks, Balaji.
Okay.
This is
amazing.
Great. This is fun.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
this is awesome.
All right. On that note,
what was that? 3 hours?
That was 3 hours
This is the
of
longest episode we've ever done.
3 hours of just Balaji downloaded.
It was great. That was
Entire
so
conscious.
fun. It was really fun. I think it's to what you said, it's a 2013 startup school thought. The through line all the way from there to the network state. I think is just you can kind of see the vision of that. Thinking about US as Microsoft and the exit, all the way to your life's goal being getting the first network state out. I think it's pretty remarkable.
I'm going to say at some point in time, the next 10, 20 years, somebody who's watching this is going to go, I remember Balaji talking about this on that show way back then, and this thing happened.
I mean, I think he's already done that for the pandemic. He's done that for a bunch of things where, he's basically called it. And he seems to have this great ability to call, in his words, things that can be exponential. And so this was a lot of fun. I had these lofty expectations and we totally surpassed them.
Well, Balaji
really
did.
fun.
And so thanks to Balaji for just an amazing several hours of this. And thanks, everyone. Hope you all had fun. Until next time. See ya.
See you, folks.
Bye.